Chapter 545. As soon as the young man opened his eyes, it wasn't just the entire sky that instantly turned blood red, a strand of extremely powerful killing intent even blanketed the surroundings. The eyes of everyone here actually started to slowly turn red while they were enveloped by this killing intent. It was killing intent. At this moment, the hearts of everyone here were filled with killing intent. Even an expert like Mu Fengchen couldn't resist this killing intent. Right when everyone was about to be corroded by this killing intent, the green-clothed man from the sword sect suddenly closed his eyes. As soon as he did, the killing intent in the surroundings instantly receded like a receding tide, and the entire sky returned to normal. Everyone here gazed at the green-clothed man. Meanwhile, the green-clothed man opened his eyes again. But this time, his gaze had returned to normal. The green-clothed man gazed towards Wuyun, and then his gaze descended onto the founding ancestor of Wuyun in the end. He grinned when he saw the founding ancestor of Wuyun, and then he took a step forward and arrived in front of the Wuyuan's founding ancestor. Meanwhile, Mu Fengchen and the others hurriedly bowed respectfully. Founding ancestor. The green-clothed man glanced at the Wuyuan's founding ancestor and the others, and then he nodded slightly. After that, he gazed at the woman and was about to speak. However, the woman suddenly spoke indifferently. Your sword sect seems to intend to destroy my Wuyuan. The green-clothed man was slightly stunned, and then he glanced at the surroundings. It didn't take long for him to frown. What's going on? Mu Fengchen's expression changed, and he hurriedly walked over to the green-clothed man and bowed respectfully. Founding ancestor, it isn't my sword sect that intends to destroy Wuyuan. It's Wuyuan that has colluded with outsiders to frame my sword sect. Countless swordsmen of my sword sect have died miserably at their hands. The green-clothed man gazed at Mu Fengchen. Lies? Mu Fengchen's expression changed. He was about to speak when the green-clothed man turned around and gazed towards the sword sect. A moment later, the green-clothed man closed his eyes slowly. At the same time, a ray of white light shot into the center of Mu Fengchen's forehead. At this moment, Mu Fengchen's figure was frozen on the spot. All the experts of the sword sect were shocked. A moment later, the green-robed man opened his eyes. At this moment, he already knew everything. He turned around and looked down, and that was where Yi Xian was. Yi Xian's expression changed when he saw the green-clothed man as well, and he became vigilant in his heart. The green-robed man looked at Yi Xian. A moment later, his expression softened and he said with a smile, "Come forward." The green-clothed man looked at him. Yi Xian said, "Yi as of Yi of a sword." Yi Xian was puzzled. "What are you complaining about?" The blue-clothed man wanted to say something but hesitated. A moment later, he opened his palm and from the top of Yi Xian's world prison pagoda, a sword suddenly flew out. Finally, this sword steadily fell into the blue-clothed man's hand. Tower-top sword. Yi Xian's expression changed. This green-robed man was indeed related to the sword at the top of the pagoda. The green-robed man looked at the sword in his hand and smiled. Long time no see. The sword trembled slightly, and the cries of the sword shook the heavens. The green-robed man smiled and said, "I'll have to trouble you for a while." The sword trembled as if it was responding to something. At this moment, a blood-red sword suddenly flew in front of the azure-robed man. Seeing this sword, a look of surprise flashed in the azure-robed man's eyes. "It's you." As his voice fell, he pointed at the blood-red sword. The sword shook violently. Soon, a voice sounded from within. "I never expected to meet you in such a manner." The azure-robed man smiled and said, "I didn't expect it either. How have you been all these years?" The blood-red sword said, "Not very well. I met a fellow who sealed my main consciousness. If I hadn't met you, I'm afraid I wouldn't have any hope of recovering in this lifetime." The azure-robed man asked, "Who sealed you?" The blood-red sword said, "A woman. I can only blame myself. I was too arrogant in the past." The azure-robed man smiled and said, "It's not a bad thing." The blood-red sword said, "Indeed. Being sealed during this period has allowed me to understand many things." The azure-robed man smiled and said, "What do you plan to do next?" The azure-robed man fell silent for a moment and said, "I want to roam around again." The azure-robed man nodded. "Then we'll part ways here." The blood-red sword said, "We'll meet again." As soon as it finished speaking, it turned around and transformed into a ray of light that vanished into the boundless horizon. After the blood-red sword left, the azure-robed man looked at Yi Xian once more. It wasn't just the azure-robed man, even the nearby founding ancestor Win was sizing up Yi Xian. Her eyes carried a rare trace of gentleness. Yi Xian was slightly puzzled by her gaze. At this moment, the surrounding atmosphere was quite awkward. Everyone had thought that after the two founding ancestors appeared, there would be a huge battle, but they hadn't expected it to turn out like this. In particular, the sword-sex swordsman experts had ugly expressions on their faces. The azure-robed man suddenly looked at Yi Xian's abdomen. In the next moment, he opened his palm and a sheathed sword appeared in his hand. It was the sword that Yi Xian couldn't pull out. Looking at the sword in his hand, there was a trace of surprise in the azure-robed man's eyes. "It's you!" The sword in the azure-robed man's hand trembled violently. The azure-robed man didn't say anything. He put the sword back into the world prison pagoda within Yi Xian's body, and Yi Xian took the opportunity to ask, "Senior, what sword is this?" The azure-robed man smiled and said, "The sword of an old friend. This sword isn't something you can control right now, so don't casually unseal it. Wait until you're strong enough before unsealing it." At this moment, the black-clothed man next to Mu Fengchen suddenly said, "We didn't come here to listen to your nonsense, As the black-clothed man spoke, the azure-robed man turned to look at him, and in the next moment, the black-clothed man's head flew off. Everyone present was shocked. Instant kill. Mu Fengchen instantly broke out in cold sweat. The black-clothed man's strength was almost on par with his. He was instantly killed just like that? The azure-robed man said indifferently, "You won't be able to hear it now even if you wanted to." Saying so, he glanced at the remaining black-clothed men. "Is there anyone else who doesn't want to hear it?" The black-clothed men didn't even dare to breathe loudly. They turned around and left. The azure-robed man suddenly said, "Did I say you could leave?" They stopped, and one of the black-clothed men turned to look at the azure-robed man. "Your Excellency, we are—" Before he could finish, the heads of the black-clothed men next to him flew off. Everyone, the azure-robed man looked at the black-clothed man. "What do you want to say?" "I'm listening." The black-clothed man fell silent for a moment before he said, "You're bullying the weak." The azure-robed man pointed at Yi Xian in front of him and said with a smile, "Aren't you guys bullying him?" The black-clothed man fell silent for a moment before he said, "Do you think you're very strong?" The azure-robed man smiled. "What do you mean by that? How should I answer you?" The azure-robed man laughed fiercely. "The strength of the organization behind us is something that you can't even imagine. You'll never be able to imagine it in your entire lifetime." As soon as he finished speaking, he charged towards the azure-robed man. However, he'd only just taken a single step when his head flew off into the air. Blood sprayed out like a fountain. There was slight fear in the eyes of everyone here. The strength of the sword-sex founding ancestor is slightly too strong. The azure-robed man turned around to look at Yi Xian, and he smiled. "Actually, I envy you." "Envy me?" Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. "Why?" The azure-robed man roared with laughter. "I was really miserable all those years ago." Yi Xian was completely bewildered. He was just about to ask about it when the azure-robed man gazed at Yi Ling, who'd appeared by Yi Xian's side. There was a wisp of gentleness in his eyes as he gazed at Yi Ling, and then he pressed his fingers together and tapped lightly. A ray of light instantly shot into the center of Yi Ling's forehead. Yi Ling's figure trembled slightly, and then a powerful aura swept out from within her. The azure-robed man spoke softly, "I've undone the seal within her, so her current physique won't suffer any restrictions. You must protect her well." Yi Xian nodded, "I will." The azure-robed man nodded slightly, and then he seemed to have thought of something and gazed at Yi Xian's stomach. "It wasn't his doing that you were trapped. If you have any complaints, then feel free to look for the original owner of this pagoda. Of course, you can look for me as well." After a moment of silence, the voice from the 6th floor resounded, I got along very well with him, really. The azure-robed man looked at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian nodded. Senior has been very helpful to me. The azure-robed man nodded slightly. That's good. The azure-robed man looked at the nearby founding ancestor of Wen, and the latter nodded slightly. She looked down at Xianxia, who was still overcoming her tribulation. The Wuxia founding ancestor arrived by Xianxia's side, and she gazed at Xianxia as she said softly, I'm quite surprised. The azure-robed man smiled. I'm very surprised as well. The Wuxia founding ancestor nodded slightly. Wait a moment for her. The azure-robed man nodded. I have something to deal with. As he spoke, he turned to look at the nearby Mu Fengchen and the others. Mu Fengchen and the others hurriedly bowed respectfully. The azure-robed man spoke softly. I said all those years ago that the Wuxia sword sect has been on good terms for generations. You should be aware of this, right? Mu Fengchen and Li Xianfeng instantly broke out in a cold sweat. The azure-robed man looked at Li Xianfeng. That day, you told me that I was the one who harmed the sword sect? Li Xianfeng's face immediately paled. The azure-robed man shook his head. I left this avatar here in hopes of helping the sword sect cross the fifth dimension tribulation in the future. I didn't expect it to be used by you. You are too outstanding. Mu Fengchen hurriedly bowed respectfully. We know our mistakes. The azure-robed man shook his head. Do as you wish. As he spoke, he turned to Yi Xian. Do you have any questions? Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Why is this pagoda on me? The azure-robed man said. There are many reasons. Of course, the biggest reason is you. Yi Xian frowned, puzzled. The azure-robed man smiled. She and I have always felt that you are what we think you are, but you are not. Of course, there are some things that are meaningless to tell you now. When you reach the 9th floor of this pagoda, you will understand everything. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then asked, This pagoda can lead to the 5th dimension? The azure-robed man nodded. Yes. Yi Xian asked again, Have you gone to the 5th dimension? The azure-robed man shook his head. Yi Xian asked again, Why? The azure-robed man said softly, Do you know why this pagoda appeared in this universe? Yi Xian shook his head. The azure-robed man looked at the horizon. It escaped. Yi Xian, the azure-robed man said softly, Someone is playing a very big game of chess, using all living beings as chess pieces. As he spoke, his mouth curled into a cold smile. Even the three of us are being schemed against. Yi Xian asked, Who? The azure-robed man looked at Yi Xian. I don't know. If I knew, I would have killed him long ago. Yi Xian. Chapter 546. Looking at the green-robed man in front of him, Yi Xian's heart was filled with an indescribable feeling. He knew that this man in front of him should be one of the masters of the 3 swords at the top of the pagoda. And this world prison pagoda could indeed lead to the 5th dimension. Yet, it had escaped from the 5th dimension. Also, who was the chess player the green-robed man spoke of? Yi Xian shook his head. There were too many questions. At this time, the green-robed man suddenly said, Don't think too much. Just do your best. Yi Xian looked at the green-robed man. Was this pagoda left to me by my father? The green-robed man smiled. It's not easy for me to answer this question. Let's change it. Yi Xian looked at the green-robed man and asked, Someone told me that my bloodline isn't simple. It should be said that it's a little abnormal. Does Senior know what's going on? The green-robed man nodded. I know. Yi Xian asked, What kind of bloodline do I have? The green-robed man hesitated for a moment before smiling. This is also not easy to answer. Let's change it. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Then can Senior tell me something I know? The green-robed man was about to speak when the Wuxia ancestor walked over. She walked to the green-robed man's side. That's enough. The green-robed man nodded. He turned to look at Mu Fengchen and the rest. The sword sect went against my will. That was your choice. From this moment onwards, your sword sect has nothing to do with me. Not killing you is out of respect for my brothers in the past. This sword sect was founded by them and is their blood, sweat, and tears. All of you are on your own. As his voice fell, his and the Wuxia ancestors' bodies gradually turned illusory. Not far away, the Wuxia ancestor and the rest bowed respectfully. "Farewell, ancestor." The Wuxia ancestor nodded. Finally, she looked at Xianxia below. "Remember my words well." Xianxia nodded. The green-robed man looked at Yixian and said, "From now on, walk on your own." Yixian was about to speak when the green-robed man and the Wuxia ancestral master suddenly raised their heads. In the next moment, they looked at each other with a hint of doubt in their eyes. After a moment of silence, the azure-clothed man and founding ancestor Wuxia suddenly soared into the sky. In practically an instant, the two of them had traversed through countless starfields. In the end, the two of them stopped in a starry sky. Not far in front of the two of them, there was a gravestone that was thousands of feet long floating in the air. The tombstone was pitch black, and beneath it stood a long-haired man. The long-haired man's upper body was naked and his eyes were covered. He supported the tombstone with one hand and stood there like an undefeatable god of war. And on that tombstone, there was a row of blood-red words carved. The first 4 blood-red words were especially eye-catching. Prison, Yixian. Beside the green-robed man, Patriarch Wun said softly, "They're here." The green-robed man nodded. "That's fast." At this moment, the man in the distance suddenly smashed the tombstone toward the green-robed man and the bare-robed man. With this smash, the starry sky around them began to collapse inch by inch. The green-robed man was expressionless. With a point of his finger, a ray of sword light slashed the tombstone. The tombstone stopped, but the green-robed man's sword light shattered and turned into nothingness. As for the tombstone, it was not damaged at all. However, an arm-long sword mark had appeared on the bare-robed man's body. The green-robed man was about to attack again, but at this moment, he had become completely illusory. The green-robed man shook his head. "This is troublesome." As his voice faded, the lower half of his body had disappeared. In the distance, the bare-robed man did not attack again. The green-robed man looked at the bare-robed man opposite him. A ray of sword light twirled at his fingertips. He was about to attack when he seemed to have thought of something. He shook his head and smiled. "I can't help him too much." As his voice faded, he and founding ancestor Wuxia had completely disappeared. The bare-robed man carried the tombstone and continued forward. The direction he was heading in was the direction that the green-robed man and the bare-robed man had come from. Divine Martial Galaxy, Divine Martial City, Wuxia. The sudden departure of the green-robed man and the bare-robed man stunned everyone here. They left just like that? At this moment, the atmosphere here was rather awkward. The relationship between the Sword Sect's founding ancestor and the founding ancestor of Wuxia was clearly not ordinary. The Sword Sect was in the most awkward position. They hadn't expected that things would turn out like this after they summoned their founding ancestor. Their allies had been completely annihilated by their founding ancestor. That was like summoning an enemy. No matter what, the Sword Sect could be said to have suffered a huge loss. Not only had they lost so many Dao realm swordsmen, but they were also blamed by their founding ancestor. Moreover, their founding ancestor had killed all the Dao realm experts of their allies. So, the Sword Sect would definitely take the blame for that. When he thought up to this point, Mu Fengchen felt like killing himself. This time, Sword Sect had given up everything and lost everything. Mu Fengchen suddenly said, "Let's go." Li Xianfeng suddenly asked, "Just like that?" He was still a little unwilling to accept it. Mu Fengchen turned to look at Li Xianfeng. "What else do you want? What else do you want?" At the end of his words, he was practically roaring. Li Xianfeng could be said to have played a huge role in the Sword Sect's current situation. If Li Xianfeng wasn't his own grandson, he would have killed him a long time ago. It was Li Xuanfeng's foolish actions that brought the Sword Sect to this point of no return. And now, Li Xianfeng actually didn't want to give up. Li Xianfeng wanted to say something, but Mu Fengchen suddenly said angrily, "Look, what do we use to fight now?" "With what? With your head?" Now that the Sword Sect had suffered heavy losses and all their allies had been killed, the current Sword Sect couldn't fight against Wuxia at all. Moreover, Elder Yuelao and the others were still outside. Now that they had lost their allies, once these people made a comeback, what awaited the sword sect was destruction. Li Xuanfeng's expression was extremely ugly, but a moment later, his expression returned to normal. Grandfather is right, grandson was foolish. Mu Fengchen coldly looked at Li Xianfeng. Let's go. Li Xianfeng looked at Yi Xian, who was not far away. His expression was calm, no killing intent, no anger, just very calm. Yi Xian was silent. Li Xianfeng didn't say anything and left with a group of sword sect experts. The people from Wuyuan didn't stop them. Because if they were to stop them now, it would be a life and death struggle with the sword sect. If these sword sect Dao realm experts were to disregard everything, it would be a devastating blow to Wuyuan. It could be said that Wuyuan would win, but it would definitely be a Pyrrhic victory. Wuyuan didn't want to do that. Moreover, there was no need for Wuyuan to do that. Right now, the sword sect was like a street rat. Countless forces would target them. Wuyuan only needed to wait for those forces to slowly grind the sword sect to death. Wuyuan turned around and looked beside Xianxia. Suddenly, his expression changed because someone had disappeared. Sword sect. When Mu Fengchen and the rest returned to the sword sect, they saw the mess of the sword sect. Everyone's expression was incomparably complicated. The glory of the past had turned into this in less than a day. Most importantly, not only did the ancestral master not help the sword sect, he even got rid of the sword sect's ally. Without the protection of the ancestral master, it could be said that the sword sect had lost a great trump card. Mu Fengchen shook his head. Gather all the sword sect disciples and settle them down. Also, give up some territories in the city to Wuyuan. Everyone returned to Wuyuan. Behind Mu Fengchen, an old man nodded and quietly retreated. Mu Fengchen glanced at Li Xianfeng not far away. If you have enmity or hatred, just keep it in your heart. Showing it out is the behavior of an idiot. Remember, a barking dog doesn't bite. With that, he turned around and left. Li Xianfeng remained silent. Of course he hated it. What he hated the most was being played by Yi Xian. Being toyed with by someone weaker than him, how could he be reconciled to it? In particular, he was extremely unwilling to lose that precious treasure. But he was very clear that he had been overwhelmed by anger before. Li Xianfeng took a deep breath and lightly smiled. Yi Xian, we have started anew. As soon as he finished speaking, his expression suddenly changed drastically, and he suddenly drew his sword and slashed forward. As the sword slashed down, a figure in front of him was sent flying. This figure was Yi Xian. Seeing that it was Yi Xian, Li Xianfeng sneered. So it's you. I didn't expect you. At this point, his pupils suddenly constricted. No. As soon as he said that, Yi Xian, who was flying not far away, suddenly disappeared. And a sword had pierced through the back of his head. Dreamscape. The second dreamscape. It wasn't just the second dreamscape, there was also the dragon soul, dragon power, and moke power. Of course, there was also the soul-subduing sword. This time, he could be said to have used all his strength in this assassination. After the sword pierced through Li Xuanfeng's head, Yi Xian and his sword silently disappeared as if they had never been there. The moment Li Xianfeng disappeared, Mu Fengchen appeared in the field. When he saw Li Xianfeng standing stiffly on the spot, his hands trembled. Around him, the Dao realm swordsman from the sword sect also appeared. One of the Dao realm experts hurriedly walked in front of Li Xianfeng. At this moment, Li Xianfeng was still breathing. The Dao realm expert examined Li Xianfeng, then looked at Mu Fengchen and shook his head. His soul has been injured by a mysterious power. There's no way to reverse it. Mu Fengchen walked in front of Li Xianfeng. Li Xianfeng grinned. I didn't expect that I would die like this. Mu Fengchen looked at Li Xianfeng and did not speak. Li Xianfeng looked at the end of the horizon and said softly, my original goal was to make the sword sect famous and make swordsmen from all over the world join our sword sect. Unfortunately, greed brings harm. The word greed has not only blinded my eyes, it has also blinded my heart. As he said that, he looked at Mu Fengchen. Don't underestimate him. As soon as he finished speaking, his eyes no longer had any color. His soul was completely destroyed. His soul had truly been destroyed. Mu Fengchen looked at Li Xianfeng for a very long time. In the end, he turned around and left. He came to the hall of the sword sect and looked at the statue of the man in green clothes. After a while, he shook his head and smiled. What's the point of having an ancestral master who can't protect the sword sect? From now on, the sword sect has nothing to do with you. As soon as he finished speaking, he slashed with his sword. The statue of the man in green clothes was instantly reduced to powder. P.S. The weather is hot, but the room is cold. I just want a monthly ticket, but why does it seem so hopeless? Chapter 547. After killing Li Xianfeng, Yi Xian immediately left the sword sect. He did not want to be surrounded by the sword sect. The reason why he took the risk to kill Li Xianfeng was not because he acted on impulse, but because this person must die. Of course, whether it was Li Xianfeng or Mu Fengchen, in Yi Xian's heart, they were all people who must die. He had no way to kill Mu Fengchen yet, so he chose to kill Li Xianfeng. He, Yi Xian, did not want to keep his enemy alive overnight. If he could kill, he would kill. When Yi Xian returned to Wuyuan, Wuyuan was also in a mess. Although Wuyuan won this war, they also paid a certain price, especially the group of black-clothed men that appeared at the end, causing Wuyuan to lose quite a few experts. Seeing Yi Xian, Wu Wen asked solemnly, "You went to the sword sect to kill Li Xianfeng?" Yi Xian nodded. Wu Wen shook his head. Impulsive. That Li Xianfeng and Mu Fengchen are master and disciple in name, but in reality, they are grandfather and grandson. You killed Li Xianfeng, that Mu Fengchen will definitely seek revenge at all costs. Yi Xian smiled. If I didn't kill him, would they let me go? Wu Wen was silent. Yi Xian said softly, they won't let me go. Since that's the case, why don't I kill them first? He was very clear that although the sword sect's founding ancestor reprimanded the sword sect's Mu Fengchen and the others, that group of swordsmen will not change. After all, that founding ancestor is no longer a person of this era. Moreover, the sword sect knows that he has the world prison pagoda. Of course, even if the sword sect let it go, he will not let it go. This time, if it wasn't for him being prepared, Yi Ling will definitely fall into the sword sect's hands. When he thought of this, he wished for nothing more than to kill everyone in the sword sect. In front of Yi Xian, Wu Wen shook his head slightly. Forget it. You're not from Wuyuan, and the old man doesn't want to care so much. With that, he turned around and left. Yi Xian found in Lan Xiu, Lian Wanli, Yi Ling, Mo Yunqi, and the others. Everyone had gathered. This group of people were all from the Azure Firmament world. In the courtyard, Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Everyone, it might be your misfortune to know me, because I feel that I will definitely have a lot of troubles in the future." He still remembered what the green-robed man had said when he left. It wasn't a coincidence that the World Prison Pagoda had appeared in his possession. It was as if someone had deliberately arranged for this to happen, and he wasn't too clear on the complexities of the situation. But he knew that this matter definitely wasn't over. At the side, Mo Yunqi chuckled. "Are you afraid of implicating us?" Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "I've already implicated you guys." Mo Yunqi said in a low voice, "Actually, Bandit Yi, the few of us aren't weak either. I've also reached the origin realm, and ordinary sage realm cultivators aren't my match at all. After a period of time, it'll be easy for me to kill creation realm cultivators." Bai Zhe suddenly said, "His opponents are all Dao realm cultivators now." Mo Yunqi, Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Brother Mo, Wuyuan is a good place. You guys can learn a lot of things here, and you must cultivate well. In the future, I hope to fight alongside you guys." He knew that most of the time, some people would disappear as they walked. And he didn't want to lose these friends in front of him. These people were all friends that he had gone through life and death with. Mo Yunqi smiled. "Bandit Yi, don't worry. We won't be left far behind by you." Yi Xian smiled. "No matter what, you guys are my friends, my brothers. This will never change." Mo Yunqi chuckled. "I'm not used to you being so emotional all of a sudden." Hearing this, everyone looked at each other and smiled. "Cultivate." Mo Yunqi suddenly stood up. "I won't waste any more time with all of you." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Bai Zhe stood up and left as well. And Lanxiu looked at Yi Xian. What do you plan to do next? Yi Xian said softly. Take the initiative to attack. And Lanxiu nodded slightly. Be careful. Yi Xian said, all of you as well. Be careful of the Sword Sect and the Star Lord. The Star Lord. According to his guess, the group of black-clothed people that appeared earlier might have been sent by the Star Lord. And the appearance of these people allowed him to understand that even though Elder Yuelao and the others didn't believe that he had the World Prison Pagoda, there were still people who believed that he had it. In short, he didn't want to sit still and wait for death. After bidding farewell to Lanxiu and the others, Yi Xian left Divine Martial City, and he went to look for Elder Yuelao and the others outside the city. Elder Yuelao glanced at Yi Xian and didn't speak. Yi Xian glanced at Elder Yuelao and the others. Everyone, do all of you intend to leave just like this? Or do all of you intend to annihilate the Sword Sect and obtain that treasure? Elder Yuelao said indifferently, what do you think? Yi Xian said, if it's the latter, then the Sword Sect is weak right now, and it's our best opportunity. Elder Yuelao fell silent. Obviously, he had some worries. Yi Xian shook his head lightly and smiled, and then he turned around and left. Right at this moment, a voice suddenly resounded from the side. Is young Master Yi disappointed in us? Yi Xian stopped and turned around to look. The nearby space had suddenly split open, and then a woman walked out. The woman looked to be in her 20s. She wore a long black dress, and her long hair draped over her shoulders. She held a black folding fan in her hand. Behind this woman, there were two elders. One of them wore a white robe, and the other wore a black robe. Seeing this woman, Yi Lan and the others' expressions changed. They hurriedly walked in front of the woman and bowed respectfully. Third young miss. Elder Yuelao didn't speak, and he quietly retreated to stand behind the woman. The folding fan in the woman's right hand lightly touched her left palm. Yi Lan and the others hurriedly retreated to the side. Yi Xian realized that Yi Lan and the others' faces were actually dripping with cold sweat. Yi Xian looked at the woman. Who was this woman? She actually made these Dao realm experts fear her to this extent. At this moment, the woman looked at Yi Xian. She sized up Yi Xian and smiled. A man of striking appearance and monstrous strength. Not bad. Yi Xian said, Miss, you're too kind. The woman smiled. No, you're the first person I've praised. Yi Xian smiled. Then I'm honored. The woman looked in the direction of Shenwu City. I heard that the Sword Sect's founding master and Weiyuan's founding master have both appeared? Yi Lan hurriedly nodded. Yes. The woman said softly, rumor has it that these two are heavenly geniuses. It's a pity that I haven't seen them. Yi Lan respectfully said, Third young miss is the true heavenly genius. In time, third young miss will surely surpass your predecessors. The woman suddenly looked at Yi Lan. Am I that scary? Yi Lan was stunned, and hurriedly shook his head. The woman looked straight at Yi Lan. If I'm not scary, then why are you flattering me? Yi Lan broke out in cold sweat again. The woman calmly said, You're a Dao realm expert after all. You should have the demeanor of a Dao realm expert. Do you understand? Yi Lan hurriedly nodded, but he was laughing bitterly in his heart. This third young miss in front of him was not just any ordinary ruthless person. The third young miss looked at Yi Xian. Young Master Ye's goal is to destroy the Sword Sect? Yi Xian nodded. The third young miss smiled. You want to join forces with us? Yi Xian nodded again. The third young miss walked to stand in front of Yi Xian and looked straight at Yi Xian. Rumor has it that the treasure is not in the hands of the Sword Sect. It's in the hands of Brother Yi. Yi Xian smiled. What do you think, miss? The third young miss smiled. I hope young Master Yi can tell me. Yi Xian said, It's in the hands of the Sword Sect. The third young miss looked at Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian smiled. See, you don't believe me again. The third young miss smiled. Brother Yi, to avoid unnecessary trouble, can I examine you? Yi Xian shook his head. The third young miss narrowed her eyes. Yi Xian walked to stand in front of the third young Mississippi. Although you look amiable on the surface, you're arrogant in your bones. Third young miss, I want you to understand that I don't insist on cooperating with you, nor am I asking you to cooperate with me. As he spoke, he looked straight at the third young Mississippi. Of course, if the third young miss is willing to let me examine you, then I'm also willing to let the third young miss examine you. As soon as Yi Xian finished speaking, everyone's gaze fell on Yi Xian. Yi Xian ignored everyone's gazes and turned around to leave. He knew the faces of many people very well. The more you take a step back, the more they'll take a yard after taking an inch. This kind of person can't be spoiled. As for cooperation, it's naturally good if he can cooperate, but it doesn't matter to him if he can't. In the end, he still has to rely on himself. Right at this moment, two old men appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian stopped in his tracks. At this moment, the third young miss behind him smiled. Brother Yi, you might have misunderstood. As she spoke up to this point, she walked to stand in front of Yi Xian and looked straight at Yi Xian. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm just telling you. Do you understand? Yi Xian suddenly struck with his sword. This sword was incomparably swift, and it directly slashed to the end in front of him. The third young miss didn't dodge, and she just stood there. However, Yi Xian's sword seemed to slash at thin air. But the third young miss was still standing in front of him. The third young miss was expressionless. She was about to speak when she suddenly frowned. She raised her right hand to block. This block directly blocked one of the swords. Bang! The third young miss instantly retreated explosively. She had just stopped when the two flying swords slashed at her. The third young miss waved her lily-white hand lightly. Bang! The two flying swords directly shattered. At the same time, she suddenly disappeared. In the next moment, a figure directly flew out in front of her. It was none other than Yi Xian. The third young miss's mouth curled into a cold smile. But in the next moment, her pupils constricted, and she crossed her arms in front of her to block. A sword slashed down. Bang! The third young miss instantly retreated explosively by 300 m. At the same time, a wave of sword light enveloped the third young Mississippi. But in the next moment, a sword howl suddenly resounded from within the wave of sword light. In the next moment, a wave of sword light tore through the wave of sword light. The wave of sword light shattered, and the third young miss walked out with a sword in hand. The third young miss lightly tapped her sword forward. Crack! Something seemed to shatter in the surroundings. Along with this sound, everything returned to normal. The third young miss looked at the nearby Yi Xian. The triple illusion really surprised me. Yi Xian spoke softly, "You're a swordsman." The third young miss walked towards Yi Xian with her sword in hand. Surprised? Yi Xian nodded, "A little." The third young miss smirked. At this moment, the old man behind her was about to make a move, but she shook her head, "I'll do it myself." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly disappeared. Her speed was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, she appeared in front of Yi Xian, thrusting her sword towards Yi Xian's chest. However, Yi Xian did not dodge, and allowed the sword to stab into his chest. The third young miss's face changed slightly, and her eyes were filled with disbelief. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly rushed towards her, and his sword was placed on the third young miss's throat. The surroundings quietened down. The third young miss looked straight at Yi Xian. "Try and touch me?" Yi Xian slashed down with his sword. One of the third young miss's arms was sent flying. Blood spurted out like a fountain. The third young miss stared at Yi Xian. "Do you know what you're doing?" Yi Xian slashed again. The third young miss's entire left arm was sent flying. Yi Xian placed his sword across the third young miss's throat. "Continue talking, and I'll continue slashing. It's fun." Chapter 548. The entire place was silent. At this moment, Yi Xian was surrounded by Dao realm cultivators. Especially Elder Yuelao, a black-robed elder and a white-robed elder who were glaring at Yi Xian with a murderous look in their eyes. They were already prepared to attack at any time, but they never thought that Yi Xian would be completely unharmed after taking a blow from the sword. This was too strange. Even though the third lady had lost both her arms, she still looked calm in front of Yi Xian. However, at this moment, her thoughts had changed. The man before her was not afraid of her. He really dared to kill her. Furthermore, he was already prepared to kill her. She could sense the murderous intent in Yi Xian's sword. Yi Xian indeed had this thought. He did not want to make enemies, but if he had to, he would choose to kill them all. The third lady glared at Yi Xian. If you kill me, you and your friends will never have a day of peace. I'm not threatening you, I'm just telling you the truth. Yi Xian smiled. Even if I don't kill you, you'll still seek revenge on me, won't you? As he spoke, his smile turned cold and he was about to make his move. Young Master Yi. At this moment, a voice rang out. A woman was slowly walking towards them. The newcomer's features were 70 to 80% similar to the third lady. She was dressed in a snowflake long dress and had a slender figure. Her features were exquisite and she was extremely beautiful. When they saw the newcomer, Yi Lan and the others hurriedly bowed. Greetings, eldest lady. Unlike before, there was no fear on their faces, only respect. The woman nodded gently and looked at Yi Xian. Young Master Yi, have you thought about how to leave this place after killing her? Once you kill her, we will temporarily give up on the sword sect and seek revenge on you. Have you ever thought about your friends and family? Even if you can escape, can they? Yi Xian smiled. Miss, what do you think I should do? The woman replied softly, Young Master Yi, our target is not you, it's that treasure. But before that, we have to confirm if that precious treasure is still in your possession. If it's not with you, then I'm your friend. If it's with you, as long as you're willing to hand it over, we can still be friends. Yi Xian replied, You've already searched me. As he spoke, he looked towards Yuelao, who was not far away. Yuelao looked at the eldest miss and nodded slightly. The eldest young miss smiled and said, I still want to see it one more time, and it will be the last time. Because someone told us that the treasure has returned to you, and he asked us to give up on targeting the sword sect. Yi Xian was silent. The eldest young miss continued, Young Master Yi, this matter is beneficial to you as well. If the treasure isn't in your hands after my inspection, then from this moment onwards, many powers won't be keeping an eye on you. They will be keeping an eye on the sword sect, and so will we. If you don't cooperate, many forces will hesitate because they don't want to be used. Do you understand what I mean? Yi Xian looked straight at the eldest young miss. Let them retreat 100,000 feet away. Yuelao frowned slightly. Yi Xian, don't push your luck. Yi Xian ignored Yuelao and looked at the eldest young miss instead. The eldest young miss looked at Yuelao and the rest. All of you, step down. Yuelao was a little hesitant. The eldest young miss said again, Step down. Yuelao and the rest didn't dare to disobey and immediately stepped down. Soon, there were only 3 people left. Yi Xian, the third young miss, and the eldest young Mississippi. Yi Xian let go of the third young miss and walked in front of the eldest young miss. Check it. Just as the eldest young miss said, he needed to prove that the treasure wasn't on him. Only then would those forces in the dark give up on him. Only then would those people be completely at ease and target the sword sect. The eldest young miss smiled and said, Looks like young Master Yi is very confident in yourself. Yi Xian said indifferently, Check it. The eldest young miss walked in front of Yi Xian and placed her right hand on Yi Xian's chest. Soon, a powerful force instantly enveloped Yi Xian. And at this moment, a sword was pressed against the back of the eldest young miss's neck. As long as the woman in front of him made the slightest movement, his sword would instantly pierce through this woman. And this sword was the soul-suppressing sword. If this sword went down, this woman would definitely die. The eldest young miss stared at Yi Xian. Her divine sense directly entered Yi Xian's body. At this moment, everything in Yi Xian's body was clearly seen. Of course, the World Prison Pagoda was not discovered. This World Prison Pagoda already had a bit of consciousness. When it actively hid, ordinary people couldn't discover it at all. A moment later, the woman withdrew her right hand and looked at Yi Xian. You don't have a dantian. Yi Xian smiled and said, Yes. The woman took a deep look at Yi Xian and was about to speak, but Yi Xian quietly disappeared. And at this moment, Yuelao and the rest appeared in front of the woman. The eldest young miss turned around and looked in the direction of Divine Martial City. It was unknown what she was thinking. Yuelao said solemnly, "Eldest young miss, is that treasure on him?" The eldest young miss shook her head. Yuelao said, "Then it is in the hands of the sword sect." The eldest young miss said softly, "This person's words cannot be completely trusted." Yuelao frowned slightly. "Eldest young miss means that it might be on him?" The eldest young miss nodded. "This person is quite mysterious. I can't see through him. Of course, that item might be in the hands of the sword sect. This sword sect might be doing that to divert our attention." Yuelao said solemnly, "Take down Yi Xian first." The eldest young miss said softly, "We have already lost our best chance." Speaking up to here, she looked at the third young miss. "I have told you 1,000 times, when you are outside, don't look down on the people of the world. You think you are ruthless, but there are people more ruthless than you." The third young miss was expressionless. "I was careless." Speaking up to here, she looked at the eldest young miss. "You obviously have the strength to keep him here. Why did you let him go?" Yuelao and the rest also looked at the eldest young miss. The eldest young miss looked at the direction of Shenwu City and said softly, "Keeping him alive is still useful. Whether that treasure is in his hands or the sword sect's hands, they must die." Yuelao said softly, "Eldest young miss wants to deal with the sword sect first, then you can make use of this Yi Xian?" The eldest young miss nodded. "Eliminate the sword sect first." The third young miss suddenly said, "Why not kill this Yi Xian first?" The eldest young miss looked at the third young miss. "If we kill him, who will help us deal with the sword sect?" The third young miss looked at the eldest young miss. "Eldest young miss, you are so sinister." The eldest young miss looked in the direction of Shenwu City. "Yuelao, send a message to the sword sect. Tell them to give them one last chance. If they don't hand over that treasure, the sword sect will disappear from this world forever." With that, she turned and left. Yuelao took a step forward, and this step directly arrived in the sky above the sword sect. As soon as he appeared, Mu Fengchen appeared in front of him. Yuelao looked at Mu Fengchen. "Sword Saint Mu, are you sure you don't want to hand over that treasure?" Mu Fengchen said indifferently, "It seems that you still don't believe that the treasure is not in the hands of my sword sect." Yuelao said, "You said that it is in the hands of Yi Xian, then what proof do you have?" Mu Fengchen asked back, "How did Yi Xian prove it to you?" Yuelao said indifferently, "He asked us to search you." "Is Brother Mu willing to let us search you?" Mu Fengchen sneered, "If I let you search us, will you believe that the treasure is not on us?" Yuelao looked straight at Mu Fengchen. "We won't." Mu Fengchen smiled. "Then come at me if you have the ability." Yuelao shook his head and smiled. "It seems that as eldest young miss said, your sect has a backer. Is it that Star-Lord?" Mu Fengchen sneered, "My sword sect will wait for you." With that he turned and left. Yuelao was silent for a moment, then turned and left. Outside Shenwu City, eldest young miss looked in the direction of Shenwu City and smiled. "They are very confident." Yuelao nodded. "It should be that Star-Lord who interfered." "Star-Lord?" Eldest young miss said softly. "This Star-Lord has yet to appear." Yuelao said in a low voice, "Eldest young miss, do you think it is possible that this sword sect handed that treasure to the Star-Lord?" Eldest young miss shook her head. "If that treasure is in their hands, they will definitely not hand it over. No one is willing to hand over such a treasure." With that said, she frowned and looked at Yuelao. "That day, Yi Xian handed it over voluntarily?" Yuelao nodded. Eldest young miss frowned even deeper. At this moment Yuelao said, "That day, he was surrounded by us and the sword sect. He handed over this item to escape. This person knows how to let go. If he didn't hand over that treasure that day, he would definitely die." Eldest young miss said softly, "Did you find out the person behind this person?" Yuelao shook his head. "Our people went to Never-Ending Star Domain, and the person who destroyed the Star-Lord's clone that day was a middle-aged man. However, that middle-aged man has disappeared, and we don't know where he went." Eldest young miss looked at Yuelao. "We can't find out either?" Yuelao shook his head. "We can't. In short, this Yi Xian's background is not simple." Eldest young miss said softly, "How can it not be simple?" Yuelao said in a low voice. If that treasure is not in his hands, then it is best for us not to be enemies with him. This person has grown to this extent at such a young age, he will definitely be a peerless swordsman in the future. With that said, he did not continue. The forces behind them were very strong, but Yi Xian was not weak either. Eldest young miss was silent for a moment, then looked in the direction of the sword sect. Destroy the sword sect first. With that, she opened her palm, and a voice transmission talisman suddenly pierced through the air. After a few breaths, in the sky above the sword sect, a 3 kilometers long rift had suddenly split open in space, and numerous roars resounded incessantly from the depths of space. At this moment, everyone in Divine Martial City looked in the direction of the sword sect. In the sword sect, Mu Fengchen looked up at the sky, and in the space split, 12 people rushed out. These 12 people all wore black armor and helmets, and there was a long black saber hanging from their waists. Below them was a unicorn. The unicorn was several times larger than an ordinary horse, and it had a pair of black wings. Its hooves were like lightning, and it moved as fast as light. Seeing these 12 people, Mu Fengchen's expression changed. At this moment, he knew who the hidden force was. Tang Clan, the super aristocratic family of the southern wasteland world. It was rumored that the Tang clan's cavalry was invincible on land. Mu Fengchen looked at the sky and said softly, Yi Xian, even if my sword sect perishes, I will pull you down with me. P.S. Physical books, I can't give them to everyone, I'm really sorry. The reason why I only ordered 30 is because the price is really expensive. Because I ordered the hardcover edition, the paper material is hard, very exquisite. There are only a few copies left today. After sending them out, there will be no more. Earth is also in the process of preparing for it. You guys will like it. Thank you everyone for your support, thank you. Love you all. Chapter 549. When the Tang clan had attacked the sword sect, Yi Xian had been in the library of Wuyuan, understanding the world. Ever since he had left Qingqing, he had no idea what the universe was like. He only knew that it was very big. There were many detailed records about this world in Wuyuan. The book he was reading was called View of the World. This book had detailed records about the universe. From the book, he learned that the universe was endless and there were countless galaxies. The known boundaries of the universe were the southern wasteland, northern wasteland, western wasteland, and eastern wasteland. These 4 astral realms were the boundaries of the known universe. Outside the 4 astral realms was unknown. No one knew what was out there. The universe inside the 4 astral realms was called the chaotic universe. No one knew the origin of the name. There had been many brilliant civilizations in the chaotic universe. Among them, the most mysterious and ancient was the primordial race. Rumor had it that the martial arts civilization of the chaotic universe originated from the primordial race. They had disappeared for some reason and there were only scattered records. After the primordial race were the Shun clan and the Underworld clan. However, there were very few records about these 2 races. They only knew that they had disappeared mysteriously. After these 2 races came the chaotic era. The so-called chaotic era was when countless factions divided the chaotic universe. The chaotic universe was in a state of division. During this period, the chaotic universe was extremely chaotic. It wasn't until the first Master of the Order Alliance appeared and established order that the chaotic universe gradually returned to normal. However, after that, the Order Alliance's talents withered. There was no one like the first Master of the Order Alliance who could shake the all-heaven starfield. In the current era, there were a few powerful factions. The first was the Order Alliance. Although it wasn't as powerful as before, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Moreover, the Order Alliance was still the nominal leader of the chaotic universe. Apart from the Order Alliance, there were 5 super factions. They were 1 nation, 2 races, and 2 sections. 1 nation was the Theocracy. It was located in the eastern wasteland. The Theocracy could be said to be the most prosperous place in the chaotic universe. It had a vast territory and controlled more than 1,000 galaxies. Not only that, but it also had a prosperous martial arts civilization. There were also many mysterious orthodoxies, such as the Confucian school, the theocracy, and the military school. It could be said that after the Order Alliance, the theocracy's martial arts civilization represented the entire chaotic universe. Back then, God Nation wanted to unify the entire universe, but they were stopped by the Order Alliance. The attacker was a Star Lord of the Lawful Order Alliance 3,000 years ago, Gu Tetin. This person could be said to be the most monstrous person after the first Star Lord of the Order Alliance. When this person appeared back then, he shocked the entire world. When the Divine Nations invaded, this person went to the Divine Nations alone and never returned. However, the Divine Nation also retreated and never stepped into the Eastern Wasteland realm again. The world had almost forgotten about the Divine Nation. As for Gu Tatian, there were many rumors about him. Some said that he killed God Emperor of the Divine Nation and left the chaotic universe. Some said that after he killed God Emperor, he was severely injured and died. Some said that he was imprisoned in the Divine Nation. Many more. Below the Divine Nation were the two races. These two races were the Tang clan and the Monster clan. The demon race was located in the Western Wasteland domain and had an agreement with the first planet lord of the human race that the human race and the demon race would not offend each other for generations. The other clan, the Tang clan, was located in the Southern Wasteland world. The Tang clan was very mysterious. There was only one record about them. Their cavalry was unbeatable on land. After the Tang clan were the Wuxia and the sword sect of Xianxia City. This was a special place. Especially the sword sect. No force dared to look down on the sword sect because no one dared to underestimate the swordsman's combat power. Since the sword sect's founding, there had been hundreds of sword saints, and among them, there were more than 100 extraordinary sword saints. At its peak, there were 38 extraordinary sword saints and 79 sword saints at the same time. This was the sword sect's most glorious period. During this period, no one dared to provoke the sword sect in the chaotic universe. Be it the Order Alliance or the Tang clan, everyone had to give the sword sect some respect. Moreover, the sword sect and the Wuxia had been friends for generations and lived together in Xianxia City. Under such circumstances, no one dared to provoke Xianxia City. However, the relationship between the sword sect and the Wuxia turned sour. In the library, Yi Xian closed the book in his hand. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian turned and disappeared. At the entrance of the Wuxia martial arts hall, Wu Wen looked in the direction of the sword sect and said softly, "It's the Tang clan." He Liantian shook his head. The sword sect brought this upon themselves. Wu Wen said, "If the sword sect perishes, only our Wuxia will be left in Xianxia City." He Liantian looked at Wu Wen. "Master, you can't be." Wu Wen shook his head. "If the sword sect didn't have the ambition of wolves, our Wuxia would not sit idly by this time. As you said, they brought this upon themselves." Saying this, he looked at He Liantian. "You must remember, as the sect master of Wuxia, there are many times when a decision can bring disaster to Wuxia. Therefore, you must be cautious in any decision you make in the future." He Liantian nodded. "Understood." Wu Wen looked in the direction of the sword sect. The sword sect's ancestral master has already shown his trump card. Let us see what other trump cards the sword sect has. At the sword sect, the moment the Tang clan's cavalry appeared, the entire sword sect acted as if they were facing a formidable enemy. All the sword sect's disciples appeared. In the eyes of these sword sect's disciples, there was fear and solemnity, but there was no fear. In the air, the 12 of them just stood there quietly. They were very quiet, just like virgins. At this time, a woman suddenly appeared in front of the 12 people. This person was the eldest miss of the Tang clan. Behind her were the second miss and the others. The eldest miss looked down at Mu Fengchen. "Sword Saint, my Tang clan has always respected the sword sect. As long as the sword sect hands over that supreme treasure, we will leave immediately. We will not go back on our words." Mu Fengchen smiled. "I have long heard that the Tang clan's cavalry is invincible on land. This time, my sword sect would like to experience it." The eldest miss looked down at Mu Fengchen and nodded slightly. All right. As soon as she finished speaking, the 12 cavalrymen behind her suddenly charged down like rabbits. Below, Mu Fengzhen suddenly laughed. Come! Activate the sword array. As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of swords resonated in the sky above the sword sect. Then 12 swords suddenly shot up into the sky, bringing along countless sword rays. The eldest miss was expressionless and had no intention of making a move. As for the 12 cavalrymen, they did not dodge and swoop down. Everywhere they passed, the sword rays shattered and turned into nothingness. As for them, they did not even draw their sabers. Soon, the countless sword rays disappeared bit by bit. Below, Mu Fengzhen suddenly charged up into the sky. Together with him were the 8 Dao realm swordsman experts from the sword sect. In the sky, Yuelao was about to make a move, but the eldest miss shook her head. Not far away, as soon as Mu Fengzhen charged into the sky, one of the cavalrymen drew his saber and slashed forward. Mu Fengzhen's sword slashed out. Bang! That cavalryman instantly retreated hundreds of zhang, but Mu Fengzhen also retreated hundreds of zhang. As for the 8 Dao realm experts from the sword sect, they were directly suppressed and could only passively take a beating. Seeing this scene, Mu Fengzhen's expression changed. He had still underestimated these Tang clan's cavalry. The strength of these cavalrymen was not something an ordinary Dao realm expert could compare to. One must know that Dao realm swordsmen's battle strength was already very strong, but facing these cavalrymen, they were actually suppressed. At this moment, a scream suddenly rang out. A Dao realm swordsman was directly killed by 2 cavalrymen. Seeing this scene, Mu Fengzhen's expression changed. Retreat! As soon as his voice fell, all the swordsmen retreated. At this time, the 12 cavalrymen swooped down. There were clearly only 12 of them, but everyone from the sword sect felt like there was a magnificent army. Seeing this scene, Mu Fengzhen's expression became extremely solemn. He didn't dare to let the sword sect swordsmen fight against these cavalrymen. He turned to look at the sword tomb in the back mountain of the sword sect. Summon the sages. As soon as his voice fell, 10 sword cries suddenly resounded from the sword tomb in the back mountain of the sword sect. In the next moment, 10 sword lights soared into the sky above the sword sect. In the sky above the sword sect, 10 swordsmen appeared. However, all of them were souls. Of course, they were also extraordinary sword saints. The souls of these 10 extraordinary sword saints were also one of the trump cards of the sword sect. In the sky, the 10 people looked up at the 12 Tang clan cavalrymen, their eyes filled with a trace of confusion. At this time, the leading swordsman looked down at Mu Fengzhen. The latter bowed slightly. This junior is incompetent and has disturbed the ancestors. The swordsman asked softly, "Did the ancestral master appear?" Mu Fengzhen nodded. He did. The swordsman slowly closed his eyes. Ancestral master. After a moment, he looked up at the sky and said softly, "I never thought that the sword sect would be bullied one day." Mu Fengzhen's expression was somewhat ugly. The swordsman said softly, "Kill." As soon as his voice fell, the 10 people soared into the sky. In the sky, Yuelao said solemnly, "Eldest young miss, these 10 are extraordinary sword saints." Eldest young miss said lightly, "Just a strand of their souls." Yuelao nodded slightly, did not say anything. He looked not far away, where the 10 swordsmen were directly suppressing the 12 cavalrymen. Completely suppressing them. Seeing this scene, Yuelao's face immediately sank. Eldest young miss, however, remained expressionless. They are all souls. Although their combat strength is strong, their consumption is too great. Just wait. Yuelao nodded slightly. As expected, as they fought, the bodies of the 10 extraordinary sword saints became more and more illusory. Seeing this scene, Mu Fengzhen's expression became extremely ugly. He did not expect that these 10 extraordinary sword saints could not deal with these Tang clan cavalrymen in a short time. Gradually, the bodies of the 10 extraordinary sword saints became more and more transparent. Although they were still suppressing the 12 cavalrymen, they were unable to kill them. At this time, the 10 swordsmen suddenly stopped. The leading extraordinary sword saint suddenly looked down at the sword sect and said softly, "No matter what the outcome is, remember, our sword sect will never compromise." As soon as his voice fell, he and the 9 swordsmen beside him turned and charged towards the 12 cavalrymen. Their souls were burning. The final blow. Chapter 550. As the 10 transcendent sword saints' souls began to burn, the aura they exuded skyrocketed. In the air, the leader of the 12 Tang clan cavalrymen suddenly shouted, "Defend!" As soon as his voice fell, the 12 Tang clan cavalrymen wielded their sabers to block the attack. In an instant, a saber shield appeared in front of them. At this time, the sword rays arrived. Rumble. Rumbling resounded incessantly in the sky above the sword sect. The Tang clan cavalrymen retreated until they were outside the divine martial city. However, the 10 transcendent sword saints' sword rays also disappeared at this moment. However, the 12 Tang clan cavalrymen were still there. However, they didn't have it easy either. Their faces were as pale as paper. Evidently, the final attack from the 10 transcendent sword saints had seriously injured them. The sword sect. Seeing the 10 transcendent sword saints disappear, the sword sect's experts' expressions changed. The leader, Mu Fengchen, was at a loss. The sword sect. Since when did the sword sect begin to decline? He didn't know. All he knew was that the sword sect had begun to decline several generations ago. In the sect, the number of sword saints decreased with each generation. Who was to blame? No one was to blame. Since ancient times, no force had been able to remain at the peak forever. The sword sect's decline was partly due to human factors, but it was mostly due to the law of nature and the general trend. When he took over the sword sect, he wanted to change. He wanted the sword sect to leave the sword sect and return it to its former glory. However, he didn't expect that the sword sect would fall into such a situation. At this time, an old man appeared beside Mu Fengchen. This person was Yu Wuchen, the old man who taught Yi Xian consciousness sword Dao. Because Yi Xian was forced to leave the sword sect, he had completely retired and never appeared in the sword sect again. But now he had appeared. Mu Fengchen looked at Yu Wuchen. "Junior brother, am I wrong?" Yu Wuchen said softly, "You're too anxious." "Senior brother, I agree that the sword sect needs to change. However, what you need to do is not change. What you need to change is ambition. Our sword sect is currently at its lowest point. How can we be ambitious?" Mu Fengchen remained silent. Yu Wuchen continued, "The founding ancestors' intention wasn't to stop our sword sect from developing, but to protect our sword sect. Have you ever wondered why our sword sect has enjoyed such a transcendent status for thousands of years? Because we don't fight. Therefore, my sword sect has always been aloof from the outside world for thousands of years, and all the major forces have always maintained respect for my sword sect." At this point, he looked at Mu Fengchen. "Senior brother, the founding ancestors' intention is not to stop us from fighting, but not to fight for immediate benefits. During our sword sect's peak, we had dozens of transcendent sword saints. At that time, the current sect leader's strength was even more heaven-defying. However, did he lead the sword sect out of Shenwu City? That sect leader and the current swordsman, what are they fighting for? It's the Grand Dao. Mu Fengchen looked up at the sky. The Grand Dao, Yu Wuchen nodded. We are strong. Who in the world dares to bully our sword sect? If our sword sect still had 10 transcendent sword saints, would the Tang clan dare to step into our sword sect? At this point, he looked at Mu Fengchen. When you and Xianfeng coveted that supreme treasure, I've already told you that if a swordsman places all his hopes on a supreme treasure, it means he has no confidence in himself. Senior brother, you don't have any malicious intent towards the sword sect, but you are too selfish and ambitious. Our sword sect doesn't have the strength to support your ambition. Do you understand? Yu Wuchen understood very well that the sword sect's founding ancestor wanted the sword sect's future generations to study the sword Dao. The founding of the sword sect was not to dominate the heavens, but to provide a home for the swordsman. Of course, at the same time, it was to ensure that no one dared to bully these swordsmen. And now, the sword sect had violated the sword sect's founding ancestors' will. Yu Wuchen was about to speak when the Tang clan's eldest young miss spoke abruptly. "Are the two of you done?" Yu Wuchen looked up at the young lady of the Tang family. The next moment he suddenly shot up into the sky. A sword howl shot into the sky. Mu Fengshen's expression changed drastically when he heard this sword howl, and his eyes were filled with disbelief as he looked up into the sky. At the instant that Yu Wuchen shot into the sky, the Tang clan's eldest young miss's expression changed as well. Meanwhile, two old men suddenly obstructed her path, and they were experts on the same level as Elder Yuelao. However, a ray of sword energy slashed down. This. Two bloody heads fell to the ground. It was an instant kill. In the next moment, a sword slashed down towards her. Her gaze was icy cold. She pressed her fingers together, and a speck of black light appeared. Bang! An explosion resounded as the speck of black light instantly exploded, and the Tang clan's eldest young miss instantly retreated over 3 kilometers. She retreated until she was outside Divine Martial City. Meanwhile, Yu Wuchen suddenly stomped his right foot on the ground. Slash! A sword slashed through the sky from the sword sect, and it seemed like it could split the world apart. Meanwhile, 12 Tang clan's cavalrymen suddenly appeared in front of her, and they slashed their sabers forward at the same time. 1,000-meter-long saber chi tore through the sky and slashed towards the sword. Rumble! The entire sky shook violently, and the space in an area of over 10 kilometers cracked apart. Moreover, the saber energy practically exploded apart in an instant. Meanwhile, the leader of the 12 Tang clan's cavalrymen roared furiously, again. The 12 of them overlapped and slashed down at the same time. A bright ray of saber energy tore through the sky. At the same time, the 12 of them vanished at the same time, and then numerous rays of saber energy slashed down like a storm against the sword energy. The powerful sword energy was forcefully stopped at this moment, and then a single breath of time passed before a saber tore through the sky and slashed the sword energy into pieces. At this moment, a figure flashed by. A figure and a ray of sword energy. This person was Yu Wuchen. The 12 Tang clan's cavalrymen in front of Yu Wuchen suddenly roared in unison, "Break!" The 12 of them drew their sabers at the same time. A sharp sound tore the surrounding space apart. However, as the ray of sword energy arrived, rumble! The 12 Tang clan's cavalrymen were blasted out of Divine Martial City. In the sky, Yu Wuchen held his sword and looked coldly at Tang clan's young miss and the others. Meanwhile, everyone in the sword sect was looking at Yu Wuchen. Or rather, everyone in Divine Martial City was looking at Yu Wuchen. Extraordinary sword saint. Yu Wuchen wasn't a Dao realm expert, nor was he a sword saint. He was an extraordinary sword saint. Below, Mu Fengshen looked blankly at Yu Wuchen in the sky. "Master, back then, you didn't pass the position to junior brother because you wanted him to focus on the sword Dao." In the surroundings, countless disciples of the sword sect were also looking at Yu Wuchen. Their blood was boiling. Extraordinary sword saint. Yu Wuchen's appearance had undoubtedly allowed them to see a ray of light in the darkness. Wu Wen looked at Yu Wuchen in the sky with a grave expression. Extraordinary sword saint. If Yu Wuchen had attacked Wu Wen that day, Wu Wen would have suffered great losses. It might even have changed the outcome. A transcendent sword saint was one of the most supreme experts in the entire Chaosverse. Yi Xian was also slightly shocked. He hadn't expected that the old man who had taught him would be so strong. In the sky above Divine Martial City, Yu Wuchen looked at the distant eldest miss of the Tang clan. "My sword sect doesn't want to fight. But if we have to fight, then my sword sect doesn't fear anyone." Eldest miss of the Tang clan looked at Yu Wuchen. "An extraordinary sword saint wants to stop my Tang clan? You're thinking too much." As soon as she finished speaking, she opened her palm, and a voice transmission talisman shot into the sky. Bang! Suddenly, a huge crack appeared in the sky. In the next moment, a powerful aura came from the crack, and a middle-aged man walked out. The middle-aged man wore a tight black robe and carried a saber on his back. As soon as the middle-aged man appeared, the Tang clan cavalrymen bowed in unison. "Greetings, honorable sir." The middle-aged man nodded slightly. Then he looked at Eldest Miss and bowed slightly. "Greetings, Eldest Miss." Eldest Miss nodded. "Thank you, Honorable Xiao." Honorable Xiao smiled. "It's my duty." As he spoke, he turned around to gaze at Yu Wuchen, who stood nearby, and he spoke softly. "An extraordinary sword saint. Please provide me with your guidance." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly drew his saber, and an expanse of light surged forward. At this moment, the entire sky was covered in this expanse of light. At the moment that Honorable Xiao drew his saber, Yu Wuchen suddenly pressed his fingers together and pointed forward. In an instant, a sword left a ray of light behind it as it tore through the sky. As soon as the sword appeared, the ray of light in front of Yu Wuchen was instantly torn apart. The sword shot forward and slashed towards Honorable Xiao. At this moment, Xiao Zuantong leaped up, and in the next moment, a long blade directly slashed the longsword. Bang! The sword was blasted flying, but it wasn't long before it was caught by a hand. It was Yu Wuchen. Yu Wuchen looked towards Wuyan and said, "Watch carefully." As soon as he finished speaking, he tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and suddenly vanished. In an instant, the entire sky above Shenwu City was covered in sword and saber lights. In the dark, Yi Xian stared at the sky. He knew that Yu Wuchen wanted him to watch. The two of them were fighting in close combat. The speed of the two of them was too fast, so fast that it exceeded his current understanding. Because after using the Dragon Soul, he could barely see the two of them clearly. He knew that this was an opportunity for him to reach a higher level of Sword Dao. As the two of them fought in the sky above Shenwu City, the entire space was shattered. Everyone was watching the two of them. The outcome of this battle would determine the fate of the Sword Sect. Without the Sword Sect's founding ancestor's soul as a trump card, an extraordinary Sword Saint could be said to be the Sword Sect's last hope. After about 15 minutes, the two of them suddenly separated in the sky, but the next moment, the entire sky was filled with sword and saber lights. In Wuyan, Yi Xian, who had been staring at the sky, slowly closed his eyes. At this moment, Tang family's eldest daughter suddenly shouted, "Kill!" As soon as her voice fell, the 12 people behind her suddenly rushed down. Below, Mu Fengxian's expression became ferocious. "All disciples of the Sword Sect, listen to my command, fight to the last man." Then he almost roared, "My Sword Sect will never compromise. My Sword Sect will never compromise." In the Sword Sect, the voice of countless swordsmen soared into the sky, resounding through the clouds. P.S. The demand for physical books is too high. I plan to order 10 more books, which will be the last 10. The reason why I won't sell them is that I can give them as gifts, but I can't profit from it because it involves copyright and other aspects. I have the right to give them as gifts, but I don't have the right to sell them. All of you should understand. You can leave a message in the book review section. Don't enter my activity post because there are too many comments. You can leave a message in the book review section because it's the easiest to win. For the last 10 books, I will be stricter. I will read each and every comment. Also, I would like to thank all the readers who came to support me this time. Please subscribe to the original version. Thank you very much. Chapter 551. Never Compromise. This was the spiritual belief of the Sword Sect. What was a swordsman? A swordsman who would rather break than bend. No matter how strong the enemy was, a swordsman had to have the courage to draw his sword. No surrender, no peace, and no compromise. There was only one word to describe it: fight. This was how the Sword Sect used to be. At that time, the Sword Sect didn't fight and didn't leave Divine Martial City, but would anyone dare to look down upon the Sword Sect? Even though the Sword Sect was at an absolute disadvantage now, not a single person was afraid. Sword intent. Countless strands of sword intent shot into the sky within the Sword Sect, and they circled in the air for a long time. Moreover, they were growing stronger and stronger. The eldest young miss of the Tang clan looked down at the Sword Sect with an emotionless expression. Never compromise? Let me see how tough the bones of the Sword Sect are. As soon as she finished speaking, she raised her head to look at Xiao Juntong. Don't hold back. In the sky, Xiao Juntong suddenly stopped, and his right hand held tightly onto the hilt of his saber. After a moment of silence, he suddenly drew his saber and slashed forward repeatedly. In an instant he'd slashed 10 times in succession. Bang! Every single slash from Xiao Juntong would cause Yu Wuchen to move 300 m back, and when Xiao Juntong slashed 10 times, Yu Wuchen had moved 3 kilometers back. Moreover, the space between them had become pitch black. The entire space had been slashed apart by Xiao Juntong's saber. However, it didn't take long for the space in the sky above the sword sect to return to normal, and a wisp of blood was flowing down from the corner of Yu Wuchen's mouth. The expressions of the sword sect disciples instantly became solemn when they witnessed this scene. Did he lose? Yi Xian looked up at Yu Wuchen in the sky as well. Did he lose? Yu Wuchen gazed at Xiao Juntong, and Xiao Juntong smiled. Please provide me with your guidance. Yu Wuchen said calmly, as you wish. As soon as he finished speaking, he took a step forward. At the same time, he placed his sword against the center of his forehead. In an instant, a powerful strand of sword intent and sword chi suddenly converged within his body and into his sword. To be more precise, it converged at the tip of his sword. The space above the sword began to split apart inch by inch. In the distance, Xiao Juntong narrowed his eyes and gripped his saber tightly in his left hand. After a moment of silence, Yu Wuchen suddenly took a step forward. His left hand's fingers slid down the blade of the sword. Slash! The sound was like thunder. As soon as his voice resounded, a snow-white ray of light tore through the sky. A sharp tearing sound resounded. In the distance, Xiao Juntong suddenly unsheathed his saber and dashed forward. Behind him, countless afterimages appeared. Kill! As Xiao Juntong's voice rang out, a blade energy suddenly slashed at the sword light. There was a moment of silence. Boom! The sky suddenly shook violently as countless rays of light exploded apart. At the same time, a figure was blasted flying. It was none other than Xiao Juntong. The faces of the Tang clan's eldest young miss and the others instantly fell. At this moment, Yu Wuchen, who was still in the air, suddenly took another step forward. Again. As soon as he finished speaking, another ray of light slashed forward. Outside Divine Martial City, Xiao Juntong had just swung his saber when his figure was blasted flying again. Another 3 kilometers away. In the sky above the sword sect, Yu Wuchen took another step forward. This time, the sword in his hand flew forward. At this moment, the ray of light was like a scorching sun, and it was so formidable that others didn't dare to look at it directly. Xiao Juntong suddenly laughed savagely, and then he drew his saber and swung it repeatedly. Rays of light shot out incessantly, but they were instantly shattered as soon as they appeared. Meanwhile, a ray of light suddenly flashed through the sky. Xiao Juntong raised his saber to block it, but the ray of light had already appeared behind him. The surroundings fell silent. Everyone was staring fixedly at Xiao Juntong. The knife in Xiao Juntong's hand suddenly split open, and at the same time, the space between his eyebrows split open. He lost. In the sky, the faces of the Tang clan's experts sank. However, the Tang clan's eldest young miss was still expressionless. Xiao Juntong looked at Yu Wuchen in the distance. What an extraordinary sword saint! As soon as he finished speaking, countless rays of sword energy suddenly slashed out from his body, and he was instantly sliced into countless pieces. Countless disciples of the sword sect suddenly cheered. We won. Even Mu Fengchen's face relaxed. No matter what, he didn't want the sword sect to perish. In the sky, Yu Wuchen looked at the Tang clan's eldest young miss, and the latter suddenly clapped her hands and laughed. What an extraordinary sword saint! If the sword sect had a few more extraordinary sword saints, my Tang clan would really have to reconsider. Yu Wuchen looked at the Tang clan's eldest young miss. Is a life and death struggle good for your Tang clan? The Tang clan's eldest young miss laughed. Hand over the treasure and we will leave. If you don't, it's not a life and death struggle, but your sword sect will die. At this time, Mu Fengchen appeared in front of the Tang clan's eldest young miss. The treasure is not in the hands of my sword sect. The old man can swear on his soul. Hearing this, the Tang clan's eldest young miss narrowed her eyes. Swear on his soul. A sword sect's swearing on his soul was no joke. Is it really not in the hands of the sword sect? The Tang clan's eldest young miss was somewhat puzzled. Mu Fengchen continued, that Yi Xian is a cunning man. Do you think his words are trustworthy? The Tang clan's eldest young miss fell silent. Just as Mu Fengchen wanted to say something, Yi Xian suddenly appeared on the right not far away. Everyone present shifted their attention to Yi Xian. Yi Xian. Mu Fengchen stared fixedly at Yi Xian. You caused my sword sect to fall into such a situation. What do you think? You're very proud of yourself, aren't you? Yi Xian smiled. Sect Master Mu, don't say that you're the victim. Isn't it your own doing that the sword sect has fallen to such a state? Mu Fengchen's right hand tightly gripped the sword in his hand. Yi Xian looked at the Tang clan's eldest young miss. Lady Tang, if you've investigated me, you should know that I, Yi Xian, might not be strong, but I've never betrayed my friends. What about the sword sect? I've already joined the sword sect, but the sword sect actually chased me out of the sword sect because of that treasure, and even framed me for stealing the sword sect's treasure. As he spoke up to here, he swept a glance at the sword sect disciples. The sword sect has placed a bounty on me, accusing me of stealing the sword sect's treasure. Then, let me ask, does that treasure belong to the sword sect? The Tang clan's eldest young miss looked at Mu Fengchen. Sect Master Mu, I'd also like to know, does that treasure belong to the sword sect? Mu Fengchen's face turned dark, and just as he was about to speak, Yi Xian spoke up, it's fine if you're slandering me. In order to kill me, the sword sect actually went to Wuyuan to deal with my sister and friends. What did the sword sect go to Wuyuan for? To target a little girl. Where's your face? Where's your fucking face? Yi Xian. Mu Fengchen stared at Yi Xian in anger. Yi Xian suddenly barked, what about you? Old dog Mu, you and your grandson have killed so many sword sect disciples because of your greed, don't you feel heartache? Now that the sword sect has fallen to such a state, how can you face the ancestors of the sword sect? Mu Fengchen glared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, enough with this old man. The treasure is clearly in your hands. Yi Xian laughed coldly. In my hands? That day, when I handed over the treasure, your sword sect threatened Yi Lan and the others, forcing them to leave Shenwu City. He then looked at Yi Lan, who was standing behind Miss Tang. Senior Yi Lan, you saw it with your own eyes. You saw it with your own eyes. How arrogant was the sword sect that day? They lied through their teeth, saying that the treasure belonged to the sword sect. They even threatened you. Do you still remember? Yi Lan glared at Mu Fengchen. How can I forget? That day, the sword sect was really something. They even said that if we didn't leave, we would never be able to leave Shenwu City. Mu Fengchen's expression was extremely ugly. Yi Xian continued, Sect leader Mu, you said that the treasure is in my hands. Then let me ask you, that day when the treasure fell into your hands, how do you think I was going to snatch it from the hands of so many powerful cultivators? Don't tell me that the treasure grew its own legs and can walk on its own? Mu Fengchen retorted angrily, it did walk on its own. As soon as he said this, everyone turned to look at Mu Fengchen. Yi Xian shook his head and sighed, you're shameless to this extent, what else can I say? Since you said it's in my hands, then it's in my hands. Yi Xian, don't bother arguing with you anymore. Mu Fengchen glared angrily at Yi Xian. He was so angry that he nearly spat out blood. Yi Xian ignored Mu Fengchen. At this moment, Mu Fengchen suddenly said, Yi Xian, do you only know how to talk glibly? Yi Xian looked at Mu Fengchen. Then shall we fight one-on-one? Mu Fengchen narrowed his eyes. As you wish. As he spoke, he was about to make his move. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly exclaimed in shock. You really want to fight me one-on-one? Where's your shame? Don't you have any shame? Mu Fengchen stared at Yi Xian without saying a word. At this moment, he had regained his composure. He realized that Yi Xian was purposely trying to provoke him so that he would make a mistake. At this time, Yu Wuchen looked at Yi Xian with complicated feelings. When Yi Xian came to Sword Sect, he fancied Yi Xian's talent and potential. Unfortunately, the Sword Sect pushed this genius away with their own hands. What he didn't expect was that the sword sect not only pushed Yi Xian away, but also wanted to kill him. Now, the sword sect and Yi Xian had no chance of redemption, because the sword sect was too ruthless. Yu Wuchen sighed in a low voice. Kid, since things have come to this, I don't want to say anything more. You and the old man are on different sides now. The old man will not show mercy to you because I am a member of sword sect. Yi Xian nodded. I understand. Yu Wuchen turned to look at Miss Tang. If you don't believe me, the sect leader of sword sect, the old man swears on his soul that the treasure is not in the hands of sword sect. Lady Tang smiled. So, it's in the hands of young Master Yi. Yu Wuchen said, this thing has a spirit. It's not strange for it to run away by itself, isn't it? Moreover, the old man believes that with Lady Tang's wisdom, she should be able to understand many things. Lady Tang looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Young Master Yi, do you have anything to say? Yi Xian shook his head. Mu Fengchen looked at Yi Xian and sneered. Aren't you very talkative? Go on. At this time, Lady Tang suddenly said, no, that treasure is not in young Master Ye's hands. It's in the hands of your sword sect. Mu Fengchen looked at Lady Tang in astonishment, but the latter was expressionless. She opened her palm, and another voice transmission talisman soared into the sky. The next moment, the space above the sword sect suddenly cracked, and several powerful auras swept out from the crack. Yu Wuchen stared at Lady Tang. Since we're enemies, we should kill them all, right? Lady Tang's lips curled up. The sword sect has been preparing for many years. Since we're here, how can we return empty-handed? Then she looked at Yi Xian. Young Master Yi, can you help us? Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then said, sorry, my stomach hurts. Talk to you later. After saying that, he turned around and ran. Everyone was dumbfounded. Yi Xian ran very fast. He knew very well that after this Lady Tang dealt with the sword sect, she would definitely come after him immediately. This woman was very shrewd. Chapter 552. Eldest Miss Tang hadn't expected that Yi Xian would actually turn around and run away. Obviously, Yi Xian had seen through her intentions. At this moment, the atmosphere was slightly awkward. Destroy the sword sect or not? Eldest Miss Tang remained silent. If it was destroyed, then the sword sect would definitely fight to the death, and the Tang family would definitely have to pay a price. If it wasn't destroyed, then they would have shed all pretenses with the sword sect. Moreover, the sword sect was at its weakest right now. If they didn't destroy it now, then once the sword sect recovered, they would have to pay a huge price if they wanted to destroy the sword sect. Destroy it? Not destroy it? Eldest Miss Tang was hesitating. On the other hand, everyone from the sword sect was looking at the woman who stood before them. Any decision she made might change the fate of the sword sect. Needless to say, Yu Wuchen felt helpless at this moment, or rather, he felt slightly sad. Since when did the sword sect have to live by the whims of others? But now, the sword sect couldn't be unyielding. If they didn't fight to the death with the Wuyan sect, then the sword sect would have no problem protecting itself with the formations and the ancestral souls. But now, the sword sect had suffered heavy losses, and they couldn't fight the Tang family to the death. So, it was best not to fight if they could. The decision to fight or not didn't lie in the hands of the sword sect, but in the hands of the Tang family. Right at this moment, Yilan suddenly said, Eldest Miss, if we don't destroy the sword sect now, then once the sword sect takes revenge in the future. Moreover, the sword sect has been accumulating wealth for many years. If we can obtain the wealth of the sword sect, you should know that the family is expanding and needs wealth. If we can obtain the wealth of the sword sect, then we won't have to worry about wealth for the next few years. The eldest daughter of the Tang family remained silent and did not speak. Yilan continued, besides, the sword sect is obviously in cahoots with the Order Alliance. If we let them go this time, they will definitely side with the Order Alliance. On the other hand, once we enter into conflict with the Order Alliance in the future, the sword sect will definitely take revenge against us. So, I suggest that we pay a small price to annihilate the sword sect. Especially now that the sword sect has lost its ancestor's clone, It's the best opportunity for us to act. When he spoke up to hear, he hesitated for a moment and said, "Eldest young miss, so long as we annihilate the sword sect, then even if that treasure isn't in the sword sect's possession, we can just look for Yi Xian. But if we don't destroy this sword sect, once this sword sect joins hands with Yi Xian and Wu Yuan, it will be extremely disadvantageous to us if the Star Lord gets involved. If we destroy the sword sect and Yi Xian is the only one left, Wu Yuan would never be able to protect him. By then, it would be much easier for us to deal with him. Even if Wu Yuan were to protect him, it wouldn't be difficult for us." The eldest young Miss Tang looked at Yu Wuchen in the distance. "I wonder if the sect is interested in joining the Tang clan?" Everyone turned to look at the eldest young Miss Tang when they heard this. Even Yi Lan stared at the eldest young miss in disbelief. "This eldest young miss is even more ruthless than me. She wants to subdue the sword sect?" Yu Wuchen's expression instantly turned gloomy when he heard the eldest young Miss Tang's words. "You want the sword sect to submit to the Tang clan?" The eldest young Miss Tang smiled. "Your Excellency, we're working together." Yu Wuchen laughed icily. "Working together? Do you believe that?" The eldest young Miss Tang smiled. "It looks like the sect has no intention of working together with the Tang clan." Yu Wuchen looked at the sword sect disciples below him. "Are you willing to surrender?" "Surrender?" The sword sect disciples below him roared in unison. "Ning Zhan dies." Yu Wuchen turned to look at the eldest young Miss Tang. "Are you aware of the sword sect's attitude?" The eldest young Miss Tang replied indifferently, "Ning Zhan dies? Fine, I'll fulfill your wish." As soon as she finished speaking, she opened her palm and there was a voice transmission talisman in her palm. Suddenly, Yu Wuchen, who was standing not too far away from her, suddenly vanished and a ray of sword light slashed towards the eldest young Miss Tang. It was obvious that Yu Wuchen wanted to strike first to gain the upper hand. Since the Tang clan was unwilling to give up, the sword sect would naturally strike first before the powerhouses of the Tang clan arrived. Yu Wuchen's attack was extremely swift and he arrived in front of the eldest young Miss Tang in the blink of an eye. The eldest young Miss Tang remained expressionless and did not dodge. However, right when Yu Wuchen's sword was 1.5 m away from her, a shadow suddenly appeared in front of Yu Wuchen. In the next moment, a saber struck the tip of Yu Wuchen's sword. Bang! Yu Wuchen instantly returned to where he stood earlier. Everyone looked towards the eldest young Miss Tang. There was a figure in black armor standing in front of her. The figure was tall and around twice the size of an ordinary person, and he wore a black helmet that concealed his appearance. Moreover, there was a sheathed saber hanging from his waist. Yu Wuchen gazed at the armored figure with a solemn expression in his eyes. Meanwhile, Lady Tang suddenly said, "Will the sword sect surrender or not?" When she spoke up to this point, she suddenly chuckled. "The sword sect will definitely not surrender now that I've asked this question. Wait a moment." As soon as she finished speaking, she opened her palm, and the voice transmission talisman suddenly shot into the sky. It didn't take long for a group of cavaliers to charge out from the spatial rift in the sky above the sword sect. The Tang clan's cavaliers. There were a total of 16 of them. Moreover, there was a group of experts in tight black clothes and black longbows in their hands. There were a total of 9 of them. The expressions of the members of the sword sect changed when they witnessed this scene. It wasn't just the sword sect, even Wu Wen and the others from Wuyuan had extremely solemn expressions on their faces. There were a total of 37 extraordinary experts. Coupled with the armored figure by the eldest young Miss Tang's side, such a lineup. Even the joint forces of the sword sect of Wuyuan might not be able to resist it. Has the Tang clan become so strong? Wu Wen's eyes were filled with deep worry. In the beginning, the sword sect of Wuyuan felt that they were the top power in the chaotic universe. But now it seemed like the sword sect and Wuyuan had fallen behind slightly. When they had the clone of their ancestor, the sword sect and Wuyuan still had something to rely on. After all, the clone of their ancestor was extraordinarily heaven-defying, and it could be said that no matter how many came, they would die. But now, the clone of their ancestor was gone. Whether it was Wu Yuan or the sword sect, they had lost what could be considered their strongest trump card. When he thought up to hear, Wu Wen sighed in a low voice. If the sword sect and the martial institution didn't have internal strife and joined forces, then who would dare to invade divine martial city with the clones of their ancestors present? But now, at this moment, he also felt danger. In the sky above the sword sect, as the Tang clan expert appeared, an invisible pressure instantly enveloped the entire sword sect. This was the suppression of strength. In the sky, Lady Tang looked at Yu Wuchen. "I'll ask you again. Are you going to surrender or not?" Yu Wuchen was about to speak when Mu Fengchen suddenly said, "Lady Tang, do you believe that the treasure is not in the hands of the sword sect?" Lady Tang looked at Mu Fengchen. "It's not important." Mu Fengchen said solemnly, "It's very important. Lady Tang, I can guarantee you that if we fight today, the sword sect will give up everything and at least 90% of your experts will die. By then, how are you going to fight against Yi Xian? Or do you really think that swordsman is that simple?" That day, the Astral Lord gathered the experts from several starfields to attack Neverending Starfield, but what was the result? All the experts were killed, and even the Astral Lord's clone was killed. Have you never thought about this? Lady Tang shook her head. "Sect leader Mu, I don't care about Yi Xian now. I only want to ask you one question. Will the sword sect surrender or not?" Mu Fengchen's face darkened when he heard that. He had wanted to divert Lady Tang's attention, but now it seemed that she wanted to destroy the sword sect. Or rather, she wanted to swallow the sword sect whole. He suddenly looked up at Lady Tang as if he had thought of something. "Your target is not only the treasure, but also the sword sect." "You're wrong." Yu Wuchen spoke softly from the side. Their original objective was only that precious treasure. But the sword sect was stupid enough to fight Wu Yuan to the death. Not only did they fight to the death, but they also used their trump cards one after another. So, their target was not just the treasure. We gave her the chance. Now, not only does she want to devour my sword sect, she also wants that precious treasure. Comparing the sword sect to Yi Xian, she chose to get rid of us first because the sword sect is stronger than Yi Xian. After taking care of the sword sect, Yi Xian will be the only one left. It's easy to take care of them. Lady Tang smiled. "The sword sect is truly stupid for not allowing you to be the sect master." As she spoke, she raised her right hand and was about to swing it. Meanwhile, Mu Fengchen suddenly said, "The sword sect is willing to work together with the Tang clan." As soon as he spoke, everyone looked at Mu Fengchen. Even Yu Wuchen looked at Mu Fengchen with disbelief in his eyes. Meanwhile, all the experts of the sword sect looked at Mu Fengchen as well. Everyone thought that they had heard wrong. Surrender? Mu Fengchen gazed at Miss Tang. "The sword sect is willing to work together with the Tang clan." Miss Tang revealed a spurious smile. "What kind of cooperation?" Mu Fengchen was about to speak when Yu Wuchen spoke abruptly. "Senior brother, do you know what you're saying?" Mu Fengchen's expression was icy cold. "Junior brother, do you really want the sword sect to vanish from this world?" Yu Wuchen gazed at Mu Fengchen and remained silent. Mu Fengchen continued, "The sword sect's 10,000 years of foundation can't be destroyed in our hands." Yu Wuchen shook his head. "Do you know that if we kneel, the sword sect's 10,000 years of reputation will be destroyed in our hands? Not only will we be unable to raise our heads high, but the ancestors of the sword sect who created countless honors will die with everlasting regret. Moreover, if we kneel, the swordsman of the sword sect will become a sword in the hands of others. Would a sword without freedom and dignity still be sharp? Would we still rather break than bend?" Mu Fengchen spoke fiercely. "But are we going to let the sword sect vanish from this world? Anything is possible so long as we're alive. In any case, I don't want to let Yi Xian benefit from this." Yu Wuchen suddenly vanished. A ray of sword light instantly pierced through Mu Fengchen's head. Mu Fengchen's eyes were wide open, filled with disbelief. He never thought that this junior brother of his would suddenly attack. Everyone looked at Yu Wuchen in the air. Yu Wuchen spoke softly. "You're right. Anything is possible so long as we're alive. But if we have to live on our knees, then our sword sect would rather not have that. We, the swordsmen of the sword sect, can accept defeat, can accept death, but we will never live on our knees." As he spoke, he looked down. All disciples of the sword sect, heed my command. Even if our sword sect perishes, we will perish with dignity and dignity. Kill. Countless swordsmen's voices resounded like thunder in the sword sect. The sword sect directly attacked. P.S. I picked a few yesterday. One of them, I think his name is Me Tang 512. I left you a message twice, but you kept asking for books every day. Are you a devil? Didn't you read your own comments? Once again, I thank all the readers. There are still 7 books left. These are the last 7 books. I hope everyone can keep a calm heart because there are many who don't have it. However, it doesn't mean there is no chance. No matter what, this event is a benefit for everyone. I hope everyone can be happy. That's why I won't sell them. If I sell them, the nature of the event will change. Also, I really read your comments one by one. It's just that some of the replies are slower. I thank all the readers, especially the readers who are willing to spend money to support the original version. Chapter 553. Surrender? Wuxian hadn't even considered that. Why couldn't he? Just as he'd said, dignity, backbone, and if there was one more, then it would be pride. Since the sword sect had existed until now, when had it ever lowered its head to its enemies? It hadn't in the past, and it definitely wouldn't now. The reason Wuxian had attacked Mu Fengchen was because Mu Fengchen wanted to lead the sword sect to kneel. He'd been able to tolerate Mu Fengchen earlier because even though Mu Fengchen had selfish motives, it was for the sake of the sword sect in the end, and he had the sword sect in his heart. But now, Mu Fengchen's actions were undoubtedly equivalent to betraying the sword sect. If the sword sect really surrendered, then the countless seniors of the sword sect would truly die with everlasting regret. Wuxian led the charge towards the experts of the Tang clan. Meanwhile, the other swordsmen within the sword sect charged towards the experts of the Tang clan as well. At the same time, the sword sect activated all its sword formations. At this moment, the sword sect didn't dare hold back at all. They'd used all their trump cards. Sword formations appeared incessantly from the sword sect, and countless rays of light crisscrossed through the sky. For a time, the sword sect actually had the upper hand. Of course, it was mainly because of the sword sect's sword formations. Most of them had been left behind from thousands of years ago, and they could kill Dao realm experts with ease. Of course, there was a flaw, and it was that it consumed a huge amount of energy. Every single sword formation consumed a huge amount of energy. But at this moment, the sword sect naturally wouldn't fuss about it since it was about to be annihilated. Tang clan's eldest young miss was expressionless in midair, and the armored man by her side didn't attack as well. Meanwhile, Elder Yuelao spoke solemnly, "Eldest young miss will suffer heavy losses if this continues." She fell silent. Elder Yuelao continued, "Should we send another group of experts over?" She glanced coldly at him. "Why don't we send all the experts of the Tang clan over?" Yuelao hesitated for a moment, and then he said, "But if this goes on, it will be disadvantageous to us." Miss Tang looked at the armored man beside her. "Stall that sword, Saint." The armored man nodded. In the next moment, he appeared in front of Wuxian. Boom! An explosion suddenly resounded. The eldest daughter of the Tang family said again, "Attack!" Yuelao and the rest also rushed out. "Sword rise!" Meanwhile, a voice suddenly resounded from below the sword sect. In the next moment, the swords in the hands of countless disciples of the sword sect shot into the sky. In the air, a dozen or so Tang clan cavalrymen suddenly stood in a row, raised their sabers, and slashed down. Chi! A wave of saber light slashed down, and in an instant, a series of tearing sounds resounded above the sword sect. However, there were people dying in the sword sect every second. Archers. The arrows of the 9 archers could be said to have never missed their targets. Besides the Dao realm experts, the other experts of the sword sect couldn't stop their arrows at all. However, some of the experts of the Tang clan had fallen as well, and 5 Tang clan cavalrymen had fallen. The combat strength of the swordsmen of the sword sect wasn't to be underestimated. Especially when coupled with the sword formation, even the Tang clan cavalrymen found it difficult to resist. Overall, the Tang clan held the advantage. Wuyuan. He Liantian spoke in a low voice by Wu Wen's side. The sword sect probably won't be able to hold on for much longer. Wu Wen spoke in a low voice. If the sword sect is annihilated. He Liantian gazed at Wu Wen. Master? Wu Wen spoke softly. The eldest daughter of the Tang clan is extremely ambitious. If that precious treasure isn't in the hands of the sword sect, then who will she deal with? Yi Xian, of course. Although Yi Xian isn't from Wuyuan, he's inextricably linked to Wuyuan. At that time, it's extremely likely that she'll use this as an excuse to deal with our martial arts institution. At that time, how will Wuyuan resist the Tang clan? He Liantian spoke in a low voice. Master, you mean to help the sword sect? But if we do that, it's no different from declaring war on the Tang clan. Wu Wen looked in the direction of the sword sect. Without the lips, the teeth will be interdependent. Regardless of whether we offend them or not, they will definitely target Wuyuan. As he spoke up to this point, he slowly clenched his right hand. Pass down my order. All the experts of Wuyuan are to support the sword sect. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure shook, and he directly charged in the direction of the sword sect. He Liantian hesitated for a moment, and then hurriedly followed. Soon, the experts of Wuyuan rushed towards the sword sect. Wu Wen was very clear that this Tang family Missy's ambition was too great. With the sword sect gone, her next target would most likely be Wuyuan. At that time, no one would help Wuyuan. In the sky above the sword sect. As the experts of Wuyuan joined in, the situation instantly changed. Especially when Wuyuan also activated the formation and began to target the Tang clan's knights. In the sky, Tang family Missy's face turned extremely ugly. She did not hesitate. Everyone retreat. Soon, all the experts of Tang clan retreated out of Shenwu City. As for the sword sect and Wuyuan experts, they did not chase. Both sides faced off in the sky. Tang family Missy stared at Wu Wen and asked, "What is the meaning of Wuyuan?" Wu Wen spoke indifferently. This Shenwu City is not Tang clan's territory. Please leave with your people. The corner of Tang family Missy's mouth lifted slightly. It was a cold smile. What a great Wuyuan. Speaking up to here, her expression suddenly became somewhat ferocious. I think Wuyuan wants to be buried with the sword sect. With that, she opened her palm, and a transmission talisman suddenly soared into the sky. In Shenwu City, Yu Wuchen appeared beside Wu Wen. His expression was rather complicated. Brother Wu Wen spoke softly. Let's not talk about the past. What's important now is to get through this together. Yu Wuchen nodded slightly. The two looked into the distance. Obviously, this Tang family Missy had called for reinforcements again. Soon, another group of cavalry appeared in the sky above the sword sect. A total of 20 people. Not only that, there were also 2 giant apes the size of a small mountain. The moment these 2 giant apes appeared, the entire sky directly trembled, as if there was an earthquake. It was incomparably frightening. At this time, Lady Tang suddenly looked at the spatial crack and said coldly, "My good brother, why are you so stingy? Can't you give me a bit more in one go?" At this time, an illusory man suddenly appeared at the spatial crack. The illusory man looked down at Tang family Missy. This is already the limit that the family can give you. If you fail this time, my good sister, you will be sitting on the bench. With that said, he turned around and disappeared. Lady Tang's expression was cold. She did not expect Wuyuan to suddenly attack. This time, she had forced herself into a desperate situation. Outstanding Tang family children can mobilize a portion of the Tang family knights, but there is one requirement, and that is, it must bring benefits to the family. As long as it brings benefits to the family, anything is negotiable. But if the cost exceeds the return, then the problem will be huge. She has no way out now. Because a few Tang family knights have died, it is not easy to train these knights. It can be said that each of them is cultivated with a huge amount of resources. Of course, if she can take down the sword sect, Wuyuan, and that supreme treasure, even if all the Tang family knights die, it will be worth it. Thinking of this, her face gradually turned cold. She looked at the Shenwu City. And just when she was about to speak, Wu Wen suddenly said, "Let the Tang family see our Wu Wen's trump card. Let's show them our trump card." Behind him, He Liantian suddenly turned around and disappeared. After a few breaths, a powerful aura suddenly soared into the sky from the Wu Wen, and then, a super stone statue appeared in front of everyone. This super stone statue was twice the size of the giant ape. Not only that, but in the Wen, 3 white-haired old men suddenly appeared, but all 3 of them are soul bodies. Martial Saint. Seeing these 3 people, Lady Tang's face turned extremely ugly. At this time, Yu Wuchen suddenly said, "Attack!" As soon as his voice fell, 18 swords suddenly flew out from the sword tomb in the back mountain of the sword sect. Soon, the 18 swords hovered above the sword sect. Each sword is actually at the fortune realm. Most importantly, every single one of these swords contained a powerful sword Dao will. These swords were once the swords of the ancestors of the sword sect. No matter where they are, as long as they have no successor, their swords will return to the sword sect. And the ancestors of the sword sect used these powerful swords to create a sword array. This can be said to be the last trump card of the sword sect. After the 18 swords appeared, a monstrous sword aura directly enveloped Lady Tang. The armored expert of the Tang family suddenly stood in front of Lady Tang. And not only that, the Tang family iron cavalry also stood in front of Lady Tang. Danger! This was what all the experts of the Tang family felt at this moment. On the other hand, Lady Tang's expression was calm. She glanced at the 18 swords, then looked at Yu Wuchen. "If I'm not mistaken, these 18 swords can only be used once, right?" Yu Wuchen's face was expressionless. "Even if it can only be used once, I can still spare your life." As Lady Tang said, this sword array can only be used once. The reason why these 18 swords are so powerful is that they contain the sword will of the sword sect's experts. Once activated, these sword wills will disappear, and at that time, these swords will become pure fortune realm artifacts. Lady Tang sneered, "You want to take my life? Aren't you being too confident?" Yu Wuchen said indifferently, "These 18 swords contain the sword will of 18 transcendent sword saints, as well as 18 super sword arrays. Once activated, even gods and ghosts can kill them, let alone you? If you don't believe me, the old man can let you have a try now." Lady Tang was about to speak, but at this time, the armored man beside her suddenly said, "Unstoppable." Lady Tang looked at the armored man, and he said again, "Unstoppable." Hearing this, Lady Tang's face sank. Not far away, Wu Wen suddenly said, "Lady Tang, the old man can't say for sure that he will win, but if Wu Yuan and the sword sect join hands, even if you can win, it will be a Pyrrhic victory. At least 80% of the people you brought with you will die here, maybe even all of them. At that time, Wu Yuan and the sword sect will perish together, and you will get nothing. As for the experts of the Tang family, I believe that you won't dare to come to Shenwu City with your entire army. You also have enemies, right?" After a moment of silence, Lady Tang said, "Retreat." After that, she turned around and left with the experts of the Tang family. But not long after, she suddenly stopped and turned to look at the direction of Shenwu City. If it's just Wu Yuan and the sword sect, the Tang family naturally won't pay such a big price to deal with you. But if Wu Yuan and the sword sect have that treasure. Speaking of this, the corner of her mouth slightly lifted. Wu Wen said in a deep voice, "You know that the treasure is with Yi Xian." Lady Tang shook her head. "No, it's not with Yi Xian, it's with you." Hearing this, Wu Wen and Yu Wuchen's faces turned ugly. At this time, Lady Tang said again, "Young Master Yi, I know you are in the dark. I will tell you this, the door of the Tang family will always be open to you. You are welcome to join us, ha." Chapter 554. Soon, Miss Tang disappeared with the Tang clan's powerhouses. Wu Wen and Yu Wuchen heaved a sigh of relief in their hearts when they saw this scene. Because if the young miss of the Tang family didn't leave, then there would only be one outcome, and that would be mutual destruction. Whether it was Wu Yuan or the sword sect, they did not want to be destroyed together. In the dark, Yi Xian looked in the direction Miss Tang left and said softly, "That woman is really sinister." The words that this woman had said before she left were actually meant to sow discord. To sow discord between him and Wuyuan, as well as the Sword Sect. Needless to say, the Sword Sect and Wuyuan would definitely be on guard against him now. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian turned around and disappeared quietly. Plotting against him? Not a chance. In the sky above the Sword Sect, Yu Wuchen looked at Wu Wen and said softly, "Brother Wu Wen, what my Sword Sect did to Wu." Wu Wen shook his head. "Let's not talk about the past. Now that you are in charge of the Sword Sect, I hope that both sides can put down all grudges and face everything together." He knew very well that Wu Yuan and Sword Sect did not have their strongest trump card. If both sides did not join forces, Shenwu City would definitely change hands. Yu Wuchen nodded. "Brother Wu Wen, put it down. From today onwards, my Sword Sect and Wuyan will live and die together." Live and die together. Whether it was Wu Wen or Yu Wuchen, both knew very well that the Sword Sect and Wu Yuan were interdependent. Whoever died, the other side would not have a good ending. And if both sides joined forces, then any force that wanted to destroy them would have to pay a terrible price. At this moment, Yu Wuchen suddenly said softly, what Miss Tang said before she left, "Sowing discord." Wu Wen said solemnly, "That woman hoped that we would target Yi Xian, or rather, she did not want Yi Xian to stand on our side." Yi Xian? Yu Wuchen's expression was rather complicated. In fact, if he could turn back time, he would have chosen to directly suppress Mu Fengchen and his grandson. However, he had his concerns at that time. First, if he tried to suppress Mu Fengchen and his grandson, it might lead to an internal strife in the Sword Sect. After all, Mu Fengchen and his grandson had been running the Sword Sect for many years. They had absolute authority in the sect. Moreover, at that time, he somewhat agreed with what Mu Fengchen and his grandson had done. If Yi Xian were to stay in the Sword Sect, it would not be a good thing for the Sword Sect. However, he did not expect that Mu Fengchen and his granddaughter would try to kill Yi Xian after chasing him away, and would even be stupid enough to snatch the treasure. This was something he hadn't expected. When he found out, everything was set in stone. Wu Wen suddenly said, "We cannot have any dealings with this Yi Xian." Yu Wuchen looked at Wu Wen. "Brother Wu Wen, isn't this exactly what the Tang family's eldest daughter wants?" Wu Wen shook his head. "There's no other way. Yi Xian is a whirlpool. If he is in the divine martial city, he will bring more troubles. Because with him around, those people will definitely target our Wu Yuan and the Sword Sect at all costs. But without him, if they want to target us again, they will have to first ask if it's worth it." Yu Wuchen said solemnly, "His sister and friends are in Wien, those people." Speaking up to this point, his heart suddenly jolted. Mentality. He realized that after he took charge of the Sword Sect, his mentality had changed. He admired Yi Xian a lot. This was something he had never concealed. But after he took charge of the Sword Sect, he realized that between Yi Xian and the Sword Sect, he would subconsciously choose the Sword Sect. For the sake of the Sword Sect, he would even have some thoughts that he once disdained. For example, asking Yi Xian, his friends, and his sister to leave the divine martial city. Although this thought was fleeting, it still appeared. Yu Wuchen looked in the direction of the Sword Sect's sword tomb with a complicated gaze. In the past, he was the most talented person in the Sword Sect, and also the strongest. But the previous Sword Sect's sect master, who was also his master, had passed the sect master position to Mu Fengchen. He couldn't figure out why this was happening. He even had some resentment in the past. But now, he finally understood. His master not passing the position to him was actually for his own good. If he took charge of the Sword Sect, he might not be able to break through to Transcendent Sword Saint in his lifetime. As a sect master, no matter what he did, he had to be overcautious. And this kind of mentality would definitely affect the Sword Dao. At this time, Wu Wen suddenly said, "I'll go talk to him." Yu Wuchen retracted his thoughts and looked at Wu Wen. "Will he cooperate with you?" Wu Wen said softly, "Yes. Because he values his friends and sister very much. For them, he will definitely cooperate. Also, Brother Yu, from now on, whether it is your Sword Sect or my Wen, We need to maintain 120% vigilance to prevent that woman's sudden attack. Yu Wuchen nodded. Understood. I have already ordered all the sword sect disciples outside to rush back. There were a few swordsmen in the sword sect who were actually outside to gain experience, and among these people, there was no lack of Dao realm experts. However, some of the swordsmen had left the sect for a very long time, some even more than 100 years, and it was unknown whether these people were still alive or dead. But as long as they were not dead, these swordsmen would definitely rush back. Soon, Wu Wen left with Wu Yuan and the other experts, and the sword sect returned to peace. Of course, the hearts of the swordsmen were not at peace. The current sword sect was in a mess. This time, the sword sect could be said to have suffered heavy losses. Not only were there only 6 Dao realm experts left, but the sword sect had also lost half of its savings. It could be said that the sword sect did not dare to activate the sword formation without restraint anymore. This was because every single sword formation consumed a lot of energy. At this moment, Yu Wuchen suddenly said, "Bury those who sacrifice themselves. Apart from that, no one is allowed to leave Shenwu City from now on." As he spoke, he looked at Mu Fengshen's corpse with a complicated gaze. "Bury him well as well." With that, he turned around and walked towards the sword tomb. As the Tang clan's experts retreated, the entire Shenwu City gradually calmed down. However, the entire Shenwu City had become a little empty. The battle between the sword sect and Wu Yuan had caused a group of people to leave, and the invasion of the Tang clan's experts had caused the few remaining people in Shenwu City to leave. No one dared to stay in Shenwu City. They were all afraid of being implicated. Outside Shenwu City, in a mountain range, the Tang clan's Missy sat cross-legged on the ground. Not far from her stood a group of knights, and beside her was the armored man. After a long time, the Tang clan's Missy opened her eyes. She stood up and looked at Shenwu City with a cold gaze. Yuelao said in a deep voice, "Missy, what should we do now?" "What should we do?" The Tang clan's Missy narrowed her eyes. "What do you think we should do now?" Yuelao shook his head. "Now that Wu Yuan and Sword Sect have joined forces, if the clan does not send experts over, I'm afraid more than 90% of us will die even if we take over Shenwu City." The Tang clan's Missy shook her head. "The clan will not send experts over." Yuelao frowned slightly. "Why?" The Tang clan's Missy said indifferently, "Because someone in the clan has an opinion. The people we have are more than enough to seize that treasure." Yuelao asked, "Give up Shenwu City?" The Tang clan's Missy didn't say anything. Yuelao said again, "Missy, that treasure is really in the hands of that Yixian?" The Tang clan's Missy said softly, "Most likely. We have been fooled by this person since the beginning. Not only us, but the sword sect has also been fooled by him. This person is not only powerful, but his intelligence is also not low." Yuelao nodded. "This person is not like a swordsman. And now, he is hiding in the dark. We can't do anything to him. The only way is to attack Wu Yuan, but Wu Yuan has joined forces with the sword sect." Speaking up to here, his face darkened. Now, he realized that they really could not do anything to this Yixian. The Tang clan's Missy also fell silent. The current her was extremely angry. Originally, she could take down the sword sect and then deal with Yixian. By then, not only could she deal with Yixian, she could also take down Wu Yuan. Unfortunately, Wu Yuan suddenly helped the sword sect and ruined all her plans. Especially that Yixian, he was extremely cunning. Once he saw that the situation was not good, he immediately fled. After a while, the Tang clan's Missy suddenly said, "Go contact the star regions that attacked Never-Ending Star Region." Yuelao hesitated, then said, "I'm afraid they don't have the guts to come again." Lady Tang said indifferently, "I don't believe that they don't want revenge." Yuelao nodded slightly. "Old man, go and try." With that, he turned and left. Lady Tang looked at Yilan beside her. "Help me contact some people." After a while, Yilan also turned and left. Lady Tang looked in the direction of Divine Martial City. "Then I'll play with you." Yushin. Speaking up to here, her eyes gradually turned cold. Wu Yuan. In the martial arts hall, Yi Xian stood quietly. Not far in front of him were Wu Wen and He Liantian. Wu Wen glanced at Yi Xian. Little friend Yi, you should know why the old man sent you here, right? Yi Xian smiled. Senior Wu Wen wants me to leave? Wu Wen nodded. You must leave. My Wu Yuan cannot withstand the Tang clan and countless other forces' attacks. Yi Xian said in a low voice. If I leave, they will still come to Wu Yuan to find me. Wu Wen looked at Yi Xian. You should know what to do. Yi Xian smiled. Of course he knew what to do. He couldn't hide. He had to keep showing himself to attract the Tang clan's attention, then lead them somewhere else. As long as he showed himself, the Tang clan would definitely look for him, and they wouldn't pay a huge price to target Wu Yuan and the sword sect. To put it bluntly, he had to go out and attract their attention. Wu Wen said in a low voice, I'm sorry, we have no other choice. Yi Xian smiled. Take good care of my sister and my friends. I don't want Wu Yuan to hand them over for self-protection. If that's the case, then I can take them and leave now. He still had the prison pagoda. Naturally, he could take them and leave, but that would be very dangerous, very dangerous. If something happened to him, everyone would die. Wu Yuan looked straight at Yi Xian. Don't worry, my Wu Yuan will never betray them for self-protection. Yi Xian nodded. I will remember Senior's words. If Senior goes back on his words, I will kill everyone in Wu Yuan at all costs. If Senior keeps his words, I will stand on Wu Yuan's side at all costs, and attract everyone's hatred at all costs. After saying that, he turned and left. When he reached the door, he suddenly stopped and said, Tell my sister, her brother won't let anyone harm a single hair on her. If anyone does, then I, Yi Xian, will die. After saying that, he walked out. P.S. Because there are 4 readers who didn't come to me for their books, I have decided to draw a new one. Because there are only 6 books, I will only pick the handsome ones. Let me see how many readers can be mentioned in the same breath as me in terms of appearance. Those handsome readers who only read books and vote, you can't keep a low profile anymore. Come out. Chapter 555. Watching Yi Xian leave, Wu Wen remained silent for a long time. Beside Wu Wen, He Liantian said softly, What will this guy do? Wu Wen shook his head. No matter what he does, it has nothing to do with us. At this moment, Qin Shan suddenly rushed in. Yi Ling, that girl is gone. Hearing this, Wu Wen and He Liantian's expressions changed. The current Yi Ling was even more precious than before. Because the sword sect's founder had removed the restriction on Yi Ling's constitution, the current Yi Ling could reach the Dao realm in half a year at most. Moreover, there was no limit to Yi Ling's growth. The two of them disappeared. On an empty street in Shenwu City, a little girl rushed out of Shenwu City. Brother! The little girl cried as she ran. Her tears were like a broken dam. Soon, the little girl rushed to the gate of Shenwu City and shouted towards the outside, Brother! There was no response. At this moment, Wu Wen appeared in front of Yi Ling. Yi Ling looked at Wu Wen and felt wronged. Grandpa Wu, where is my brother? Wu Wen said softly, He left. Yi Ling squatted on the ground and held her face with both hands. She cried bitterly. He doesn't want me anymore? At this moment, she did not look like a manifestation realm expert at all. At this moment, she was a little girl panicking because she lost her brother. Wu Wen squatted in front of Yi Ling and said softly, Girl, it's not that he doesn't want you. He left to protect you. Do you understand? Yi Ling shook her head and tears flowed uncontrollably. I don't understand. I just want to follow him. I just want to follow him. As she spoke, she suddenly stood up and rushed outside. Brother? Wu Wen hurriedly stopped Yi Ling. Girl, do you know that you are his biggest weakness in this life? Yi Ling looked at Wu Wen. Her tears seemed endless. Wu Wen spoke in a low voice. Your brother is strong, extremely strong. However, he has a weakness, and his greatest weakness is you. The sword sect didn't defeat him, and neither did the Tang clan. But you defeated him, and you defeated him very easily. Do you understand? Yi Ling clenched his fists and said nothing. Wu Wen continued, You are his greatest weakness. If you were captured by the Tang clan, What would happen to him? Now that you're following him, can you help him? Girl, the current you needs to cultivate properly. Only when you are strong enough can you not implicate him and even protect him. Do you understand? Yi Ling clenched her fists. She didn't say anything. She just cried. She kept crying. Wu Wen said softly, as long as you are strong and safe, no one will be able to threaten your brother. Do you understand? Yi Ling wiped the tears off her face and looked around. Brother, I'll work hard. But you must promise me that nothing will happen to you. You must come and find me. You must. The surroundings were incomparably quiet. There was no response. Wu Wen said softly, he heard me. Yi Ling looked around blankly and said in a trembling voice, Brother, can you come out and see me for a while? Just for a while. I promise I won't pester you. I promise to go back and cultivate properly. Can you come out and see me for a while? However, there was still no response. Yi Ling cried even harder. Wu Wen's expression was rather complicated. He knew that the Yi Xian siblings had depended on each other since they were young and had a deep relationship. However, he didn't expect that this pair of siblings had such a deep relationship. Yi Ling wiped the tears off her face and pulled Wu Wen's hand. Grandpa Wu, let's go. Wu Wen nodded and pulled Yi Ling toward the divine martial city. When they reached the gate, Yi Ling suddenly stopped. She turned around and shouted, Brother, if you die, I definitely won't live. After saying that, she turned around and ran toward the divine martial city. At the city gate, Wu Wen turned his head and looked somewhere before turning around and leaving. Outside the divine martial city, Yi Xian suddenly appeared. He looked at the divine martial city with a calm expression. However, there were 2 streaks of tears on his cheeks. After a while, Yi Xian said softly, Girl, brother will live well. After saying that, he turned around and left. After a while, Yi Xian arrived at a mountain range. In front of a pool, the young lady of the Tang clan, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, suddenly opened her eyes. She looked in the opposite direction and saw someone standing there. All the experts of the Tang clan looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled faintly. Lady Tang, I came here to tell you something. Lady Tang smiled and said, What is it? Yi Xian smiled faintly. An illusory Xiaota suddenly appeared between his brows. Seeing the illusory Xiaota, Lady Tang narrowed her eyes. Yi Xian smiled and said, I want to tell Lady Tang that the treasure is in my hands, and I am going to the Order City now. Lady Tang, we will meet again. After saying that, he disappeared. No one made a move because it was not Yi Xian's real body that came, but a clone. The Order City. Lady Tang's expression was extremely cold. The Order City was the territory of the Order Alliance. Beside him, an old man said in a deep voice, He wants to lure us away. Young Mistress Tang looked at the divine martial city. She just looked at it calmly. However, everyone present could sense the rage of this eldest young Mississippi. The best way to make Yi Xian stay was to attack Wu Yuan. But now that Wu Yuan and the sword sect had joined hands, it would be very difficult for her to take them down. Especially Yi Xian. If she attacked Wu Yuan now, Yi Xian would definitely help. Even she did not dare to underestimate Yi Xian now. She had to be wary of a killer who could kill a Dao realm swordsman in seconds. Moreover, if Yi Xian went to the Order City now, if she attacked Wu Yuan, there was no guarantee that Yi Xian would not hand over the treasure to the Order Alliance. Once the treasure fell into the Order Alliance's hands, it would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens for the Tang clan to get it back. Or rather, they would have to pay a price that was at least 100 times higher than what they were paying now. After all, the Order Alliance was not something that Yi Xian and the Divine Martial City could compare to. Yi Xian's trip to the Divine Martial City had once again ruined all her plans. The old man next to Lady Tang said, Why don't we inform the family and ask them to send experts here? For that treasure, the family will definitely be willing. Lady Tang shook her head. If we do that, we will force him to hand over the treasure to the Order Alliance. At that time, it will be difficult for us to get the treasure. The old man said in a deep voice, Young lady, that treasure is so important, why didn't the family come in person? Lady Tang shook her head. He can't touch it. If he does, The one from the Order Alliance and the one from the Monster Clan will definitely take action. The old man understood. Contain. If the Tang Clan's strongest expert took action, the Order Alliance and the Monster Clan would definitely not sit idly by. Because no one wanted to see a situation where one clan was the strongest. Similarly, the Order Alliance's Star Lord could not take action himself because if he did, the Tang Clan and the Monster Clan would also stop him. Lady Tang suddenly said, "Everyone, split up and head to the Order City." Saying this, her expression gradually turned cold. Killing intent flickered in her eyes. As the Tang Clan's experts left, Wu Wen and Yu Wuchen looked at each other in the sky above the holy martial city. Both of them felt relieved. At this time, Wu Wen suddenly said, "We still can't be careless." Judging from this incident, the Tang Clan and the Order Alliance obviously have a bigger plan. And we, without the Ancestor's clone, is equivalent to losing a deterrent force. Ancestor's clone. Whether it was Wu Wen or Yu Wuchen, they felt a little bitter in their hearts. Was the Ancestor's clone strong? Of course it was strong. Killing Dao realm experts was like killing chickens. Moreover, judging from the Sword Sect's Ancestral Master's attack, even a Transcendent Sword Saint level expert would most likely be killed in a second. With the two clones, unless the Tang Clan used the entire clan's strength, it was impossible to take down the Sword Sect and Wuyuan. However, the Sword Sect and Wuyuan had an internal conflict and called the two ancestors out to fight. The problem was, the relationship between the two ancestors was not ordinary, stupid. Stupid. Whether it was Wuyuan or the Sword Sect, what they did this time could be said to be extremely stupid, especially the Sword Sect. It was especially so for the Sword Sect. Originally, the Sword Sect wanted to summon their ancestor to swallow up the martial institution and unify the divine martial city. However, they didn't expect that after their martial ancestor appeared, he directly killed their ally. He called out his biggest trump card to fight himself. Every time Yu Wuchen thought of this, he could not let it go. Wu Wen said softly, "I'm afraid the peace of this chaotic universe will be broken with Yi Xian's treasure." Yu Wuchen nodded. "I hope our two clans can survive this storm." Wu Wen looked at the distant horizon and said softly, "Actually, I'm most curious about the person behind Yi Xian. Until now, that person has not appeared. Is he worried about something?" Yu Wuchen looked at Wu Wen. "Brother Wu Wen, what strength do you think the person behind Yi Xian has?" Wu Wen shook his head. "I don't know. However, the person behind him is definitely not simple. Moreover, Yi Xian also gives me a mysterious feeling. That treasure fell into the hands of your Sword Sect, but it returned to his hands in the end. There is only one explanation, that treasure has already recognized him as its master." Hearing this, Wu Wen's face changed. Wu Wen looked at the horizon and said softly, "I'm afraid that the Tang Clan and the Order Alliance can't do anything to him, and when the time comes, they will target his sister." Yu Wuchen wanted to say something but hesitated. Wu Wen also did not ask, because he knew what Yu Wuchen wanted to say. However, Wu Wen would not give up on Enlanxio and Yi Ling. This was because Enlanxio had already obtained the inheritance of the Wuyuan Ancestral Master, and Yi Ling's seal had been removed by the Sword Sect Ancestral Master. These two people would definitely shock the heavens in the future. Yu Wuchen sighed softly. The Tang Clan, the Demon Clan, the Order Alliance. They have already started to pay attention to Yi Xian. This Yi Xian situation, Wu Wen said softly, it depends on his own luck. In a boundless starry sky, a sword flew quickly. The sword's speed was very fast, and after traveling for an unknown amount of time, it finally arrived at a small island. In the center of the small island, there sat a woman in a plain dress. She was playing chess. The woman raised a white chess piece and placed it down. A moment later, a black chess piece quietly landed on the chessboard. As this black chess piece landed, the outcome of the game was immediately decided. The woman in the plain dress was silent. At this moment, the chess piece on the chessboard suddenly disappeared, and a line of words appeared. 50 great Daoists, for 9 heavenly evolutions, 1 man escapes. P.S. Seeking monthly votes. Chapter 556. Looking at the line of words on the chessboard, the plain-dressed woman fell silent. Just then, the sword slowly floated to the plain-dressed woman's side. It floated quietly and did not disturb the plain-dressed woman. After a long time, the plain-dressed woman suddenly chuckled. The great path is life, and life is like a game of chess. You can either be a chess piece or a player. With that, she waved her hand and the line of words disappeared. Just then, the sword beside her flew to her and trembled slightly as if it was saying something. After a while, the plain-dressed woman smiled and asked softly, "Is he okay?" The sword trembled and a faint sword hum sounded. After a moment of silence, the plain-dressed woman suddenly looked at a small flower not far away. The flower was delicate and beautiful. The sword suddenly pointed to the right. Clearly, the plain-dressed woman was following it. The plain-dressed woman shook her head. "I've already led the way for him. He should walk the rest of the way himself." With that, she looked at the small flower and smiled. A flower that is protected by others cannot withstand the wind and rain. The sword trembled slightly as if it was saying something. The woman in the plain dress smiled and said, "The great Tao is something that is walked out, not protected by others." With that, she held the sword in front of her and walked towards the distant horizon. In the air, the sword trembled as if it was saying something. "Where are you going?" The plain-dressed woman looked at the end of the starry sky and smiled. "To kill people." By the time she finished speaking, she had already disappeared. And on the chessboard on the island, another line of words appeared. "Tao cannot be spoken, Tao cannot be spoken, Tao can be spoken, Tao is not Tao." Order City in the Chaotic Universe. Order City was located in the Northern Wilderness Realm and was under the jurisdiction of the Order Alliance. It took Yi Xian less than half a day to reach the Northern Wilderness Realm. Because of the interstellar teleportation formation. There was an interstellar teleportation formation in the Shenwu City. With this formation, the entire chaotic universe could be said to be very small. And from the observed world, Yi Xian learned that there was a higher-level teleportation formation other than the interstellar teleportation formation, the space-time teleportation formation. This teleportation formation was very terrifying. It would take less than 15 minutes to travel from the southern wilderness region to the northern wilderness region. When the Tang clan's experts came to the divine martial city, they used this formation. However, this kind of formation also consumed a lot of resources. Ordinary forces simply couldn't afford it. Yi Xian looked at the Order City in the distance, and the introduction of the Order City appeared in his mind. Order City. This used to be the capital of the Order Alliance and was once the most prosperous city in the entire northern wasteland domain. However, it was no longer the case. This was because the lawful Order Alliance had moved their capital to the Sky Mountain Range in the north of the northern wasteland domain. It was now the most mysterious Sky Mountain city in the northern wasteland domain. The reason why it was mysterious was because the Order Alliance didn't allow outsiders to enter Mountain Ascension City. Therefore, that place was extremely mysterious. As for the Order City, although it was no longer the capital of the Order Alliance, it was still bustling with activity. The entire orderly city was filled with the aura of history. Ancient. This was Yi Xian's first impression. Yi Xian did not openly enter the Order City. He could not defeat the Tang clan, let alone the Order Alliance. Moreover, he knew that the Order Alliance definitely knew that he was coming to Order City. These major forces did an excellent job in gathering information. On the streets, Yi Xian walked slowly. He was currently wearing a black robe and a black veil. Coupled with the chaotic energy that concealed his swordsman aura, ordinary people would not be able to detect him. On both sides of the streets, people came and went. They were all martial artists. Moreover, some of their auras were very powerful. Apart from that, he also sensed that there were a few hidden powerful auras in the city. After a while, Yi Xian found an inn. In the room, he sat cross-legged on the bed and entered the World Prison Pagoda. Cultivate. Although he was stronger than before, the enemies he encountered now were also stronger than before. He needed to improve his strength now. Yi Xian found the wooden puppet and began to spar with it. The wooden puppet's strength lay in its exquisite close combat swordsmanship. In close combat, it had a fatal suppressive force and targeted power. Right now, he had a huge flaw in close combat. Right now, his flying sword was strong, but his swordsmanship was very poor. Yi Xian used the wooden sword and began to spar with the wooden puppet. Although he had already reached the 10,000 laws realm, if he did not use some powerful sword skills, he would still be somewhat suppressed when fighting with the wooden puppet. Of course, if he used his trump card and the soul-suppressing sword, the wooden puppet would definitely not be his match. Yi Xian practiced like this, again and again. The next day, Yi Xian suddenly sat on the ground. He had been training hard for 12 to 14 hours. It had to be said that sparring with this wooden puppet was very enjoyable. He had the same feeling when fighting with people in Qing City. When fighting with people in Qing City, it was a close combat fight. If one's reaction was slow, they might lose their life. In that kind of environment, playing to the limit, playing to the heartbeat. And now, when he was fighting against the wooden man, he felt the same feeling again. Very crazy. Very exciting. One careless move and he would either die or be injured. After resting for a moment, Yi Xian stood up and began to spar with the wooden puppet again. Inside the prison pagoda, Yi Xian was crazily cultivating while the emperor dog was sleeping soundly. For demonic beasts like them, sleeping was the best way to cultivate. As for Xiaolinga, she was still planting her spirit fruits. Right now, she had hundreds of spirit fruits. If these spirit fruits were sold, they would definitely be worth a city. It could be said that other than those few creation realm treasures, Yi Xian was not as rich as her. However, this little guy valued spirit fruits more than his life. Yi Xian did not dare to sell this little guy's spirit fruits. This little guy would go crazy. Xiaolinga had already occupied the 5th floor. Soon, she came to the entrance of the 5th floor. She held her chin with both hands and looked at the 6th floor, deep in thought. And beside her, there was a sword. She picked up the sword and walked to the entrance of the 6th floor several times, but she seemed to be worried about something and gave up in the end. Of course, it was only temporary. She hugged the sword and turned to leave. On the 6th floor, a voice suddenly sounded. Is this little girl calculating whether she can beat me or not? On the 3rd day, Yi Xian lay on the ground. At this moment, his whole body was drenched in sweat. Not only that, but there were also dozens of bloody wounds on his body. At this moment, Lil Linger came up to him with 2 bright red fruits in her arms. Lil Linger handed the fruits to Yi Xian. Yi Xian did not stand on ceremony. He picked them up and ate them. As soon as the fruits entered his stomach, a wave of pure spirit aura immediately spread out from his body. Very quickly, the injuries on his body actually healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Yi Xian was shocked. He looked at the fruits in his hand and asked in astonishment, What fruit is this? Xiaolinga blinked. A little red fruit. Yi Xian, Xiaolinga asked, Is it delicious? Yi Xian nodded. Yummy. Xiaolinga pointed to the 2nd floor and said excitedly, Do you want some more? I have a lot. Yi Xian's mouth twitched. The fruits in his hand were definitely more precious than immortal crystals because of their terrifying recovery ability. At this moment, Xiaolinga suddenly approached Yi Xian and whispered, When will the 6th floor leave? Yi Xian's mouth twitched again. This little girl still had not given up on the idea. However, he was also a little curious. When would the 6th floor leave? Yi Xian looked up. Senior, can you leave the tower? The 6th floor said, Not at the moment. Yi Xian was puzzled. But the 6th floor said, It is dangerous outside. It is safer to stay here. Yi Xian's face darkened. Senior, are you joking? The 6th floor sighed. I am not joking. It is indeed dangerous outside. Don't worry, I won't stay here. When it is time to leave, I will. Yi Xian hesitated. Senior, aren't you angry that you were locked up for so many years? The 6th floor smiled. You want to ask why I didn't do anything to you? Yi Xian smiled sheepishly and nodded. The 6th floor said, Firstly, the one who locked me up wasn't you, but this tower. Even if I wanted to take revenge, I would take revenge on this tower. Taking revenge on you is a sign of incompetence. Yi Xian asked again, Senior, don't you want this tower? The sixth floor smiled. This tower is a treasure. It would be a lie to say that I am not tempted. However, this tower is not something that I can have. This tower has great karma, and I couldn't even withstand it when I was at my peak, let alone now. So, don't worry, I won't have any designs on your treasure. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Senior, you are wise. I am truly impressed. He was sincerely impressed. An expert like this knew what to take and what not to take. Being able to pick up and let go, this was a wise decision. Of course, it wasn't that he didn't want to let go, but that he couldn't. The World Prison Pagoda was already attached to him. The sixth floor said, Actually, the karma of this tower isn't something you can handle. However, you are no ordinary person. There is someone strong backing you to block most of the karma. Otherwise, you would have reincarnated a long time ago. Yi Xian smiled. No matter what, I hope we can get along well. The sixth floor said, That's exactly what I want. Even though we are not from the same era, your personality and temperament are to my liking. So, we should be able to get along well. Yi Xian wanted to say something, but he stopped. The sixth floor said, What are you trying to say? Yi Xian asked, Senior, if I gather all 9 laws, can I really control this tower? The sixth floor said, No. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? The sixth floor said, Strength. If you aren't strong enough, you will never be able to make it serve you wholeheartedly. If you gather all the laws, you will only be able to use some of the pagoda's functions and restrict us who are imprisoned here. Yi Xian nodded. I understand. The sixth floor said, Do you want to see the 7th floor? Yi Xian was startled. I can see it? The sixth floor said, Yes, I can feel that the seal on the 7th floor has loosened. I can use my divine ability to let you see the 7th floor. At this moment, Xiao Linger suddenly said, Look, look. Yi Xian looked at Xiao Linger. Xiao Linger blinked. There's a treasure. Yi Xian asked with a smile, What treasure? Xiao Linger shook his head. I don't know. Yi Xian looked up at the 6th floor. Then I'll have to trouble Senior. The 6th floor said softly, It's nothing. I also want to know what kind of trash the 7th floor is. How can he be above me? This demon. I can't accept this. Yi Xian. Chapter 557. Unacceptable. Yi Xian was amused. Regardless of whether it was the 5th or 6th floor, they actually cared about why they were 1 floor lower than the others. But then again it made sense. Regardless of whether it was the 5th or 6th floor, they were all peerless powerhouses. They must have once shocked an entire era. The 7th floor. Yi Xian was curious. Xiao Linger said there were treasures inside. What kind of treasures could there be? This little guy was so mysterious. At this time, the 6th floor said, You are the pagoda master, so the pagoda will not hurt you. However, your strength is too low, so you need my help. Later, use your divine sense to force your way into the 6th floor. Yi Xian nodded, Okay. The 6th floor said, Calm your qi and focus. Yi Xian slowly calmed down. Soon, his heart was at peace. At this time, a powerful force suddenly surged into his body. Yi Xian opened his eyes. In his eyes, sword rays flashed like lightning. Xiao Linger was startled and took a few steps back. She was panicking. At this time, the 6th floor said, Enter the 7th floor. Yi Xian ignored the terrifying force in his body. His divine sense went straight to the 7th and 6th floor. However, at the entrance of the 7th floor, a mysterious force blocked his way. Yi Xian quickly asked, Senior, what should we do? The 6th floor said, What else can we do? Force your way in. Yi Xian gathered all of his divine consciousness and blasted it towards that force. Rumble. In an instant, Yi Xian felt like his head was hit by a hammer, and he almost fainted. But luckily, there was a force that kept stimulating him, preventing him from fainting. At this time, the 6th floor's voice suddenly sounded, Hurry up, the 7th floor's restriction will automatically repair itself. You don't have much time. Yi Xian quickly calmed himself down and looked up. At this time, he was already on the 7th floor. There was only a table on the 7th floor. On the table, there was a box. On the box, there was a candied fruit wrapped in spiritual energy. Beside the box, there was an ancient book. Other than that, there was nothing else. What the hell? A box? An ancient book? Yi Xian was a little confused. This was the thing that was locked on the 7th floor? At this time, the person on the 6th floor suddenly said, "Look at that ancient book." Yi Xian's gaze landed on the ancient book. At this time, a line of words suddenly appeared above the book: unparalleled martial art, infinite sword. Boundless sword? Yi Xian frowned slightly. He moved closer and continued reading. Using the sword as a thought, using the thought as a sword. Wherever the thought is, the sword is. With a single thought, I can launch a sneak attack and backstab an enemy within a 300 m radius. I can disregard any defense, any armor, any laws, any secret techniques, any divine abilities, any Tao laws, any restrictions of the heavens and earth, and any realm. Seeing this, Yi Xian was dumbfounded. An unparalleled martial art? Ignore everything? What the hell was this? Yi Xian suppressed the excitement in his heart and continued reading, because there was more. After killing the enemy, you can immediately enter the state of emptiness. You are not restricted by the heavens and earth. No laws, no secret techniques, no Tao laws, no cause, no effect. When he read this, a powerful force suddenly appeared in the 7th floor. Boom! Yi Xian's divine sense was directly driven out of the 7th floor. In the 1st floor, Yi Xian felt as if he had suffered a heavy blow and retreated a few meters. At this moment, his head was extremely heavy like lead. At this time, Xiao Linger carried 2 fruits to Yi Xian. Yi Xian quickly ate them. Soon, the heavy feeling in his head gradually disappeared. However, his heart was like a raging sea. He could not calm down for a long time. An unparalleled martial art. Judging from the introduction, that infinite sword was really too heaven-defying. Yi Xian sat on the ground and asked in a deep voice, "Senior, is that unparalleled martial art exaggerated?" After a moment of silence, the person on the 6th floor said, "No." Yi Xian was shocked. "How is that possible, this?" The person on the 6th floor said softly, "Now, I truly believe that this tower is from the 5th dimension." Yi Xian was confused. "Senior, what do you mean?" The person on the 6th floor said, "Although rumors say that this tower is from the 5th dimension, there is no direct evidence. But now there is. This unparalleled martial art exists not only in your era, but also in my era. Do you know why this martial art is so heaven-defying?" Yi Xian shook his head. "Senior, please enlighten me." The person on the 6th floor said, "Because it is not a 4th dimension martial art, but a 5th dimension martial art." 5th dimension. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "This unparalleled martial art is from the 5th dimension?" The person on the 6th floor said, "Of course. Otherwise, how could it be so heaven-defying? The reason why it can ignore everything is because it is higher than the laws and Tao laws of the 4th dimension, and it is not restricted by the 4th dimension. Moreover, this martial art should be one of the best in the 5th dimension. Otherwise, it would not be locked in here." Yi Xian was confused. Why would a martial art be locked in a tower? The person on the 6th floor said, "Maybe because it is too heaven-defying, or maybe it is something else. Whatever the reason, it is enough to prove that it is very terrifying. If you learn this martial art now, I think you can kill that transcendent sword saint from the sword sect in a second." Kill transcendent sword saint in a second. Yi Xian was startled, then he smiled bitterly. "Is it really that heaven-defying?" The person on the 6th floor said, "If it is not heaven-defying, why would it be locked in the 7th floor?" Yi Xian was about to speak, but Xiao Linger pulled his sleeve. Yi Xian looked at Xiao Linger, and Xiao Linger pointed upstairs, full of anticipation. "What is inside?" Yi Xian smiled. "A box and a stick of candied hawthorn." "Candied hawthorn? The box?" Xiao Linger blinked, then clapped her hands and said excitedly, "Mine, that is mine." Yi Xian, Xiao Linger seemed to think of something. She looked up at Yi Xian and said happily, "That is mine, she left it for me, hee hee." Yi Xian smiled, Okay, it is yours." Xiao Linger hurriedly said, "I want to go in." Yi Xian shook his head, "You can't go in for now." Xiao Linger asked, "Why?" Yi Xian smiled, "Anyway, we can't go in for now. Let's wait for a while, okay?" Xiao Linger blinked, "Okay." After saying that, she turned and ran away. At this time, the sixth person suddenly said, "This little one's way of thinking is very dangerous. You better be careful, or else she might cause a big mess for you one day." Yi Xian nodded slightly. He also knew that Xiao Linger was a dangerous person. To say that she was naive, she had a lot of evil ideas, but to say that she was not naive, she did not understand a lot of things, she just thought it was fun. In any case, he had to be careful. Yi Xian seemed to think of something and immediately asked, "Senior, is this unparalleled martial art stronger than my life and death sword?" The sixth person said, "You can't compare it like that. Your sword skill is more of a belief in the way of the sword. Its power depends on your understanding of the way of the sword. It can be said that this is a growth-type sword skill. As for this unparalleled martial art, it belongs to the fifth dimension. If you really want to compare, only the original owners of the two sword skills can fight it out. Only then will you know which is stronger." Yi Xian smiled, "Then there is no other way. The woman in the plain dress?" At the thought of this, he suddenly missed her a little. The woman who could be said to be the one who changed Yi Xian's fate, he wondered where she was now. After a while, Yi Xian shook his head, collected his thoughts, and continued to cultivate. Sparring with the wooden man had greatly improved him, especially in terms of close combat. It could be said that he had undergone a qualitative transformation from before. Of course, he did not forget about his own life and death sword. One should know that his flying sword was now his most lethal trump card. And the divine blood technique. All of these could be combined with his life and death sword. Using blood to condense the sword. This divine blood technique was also one of his trump cards. He could use the opponent's blood to condense the sword, and then control the flying sword to defeat the enemy. In fact, this move was a group attack sword skill. The more enemies, the better, because the more blood, the more powerful this divine blood technique would be. And the Moku power could still be used. As for the God King sword, it was also one of his strongest trump cards. The enhancement of the dragon soul and dragon power was not just a little bit. Overall, his current strength was still somewhat dependent on external objects, and if he removed the soul-subduing sword and the God King sword, his strength would be reduced to a certain extent. And now, what he was training was his basic skills. He could use external objects, but he had to recognize himself. On this day, Yi Xian, who was cultivating, suddenly looked up. The next moment, he left the prison pagoda and returned to his room. And at this moment, outside the room, a voice suddenly sounded, "Young Master Yi, our city lord invites you in." City lord? Yi Xian frowned slightly. He had been discovered? Yi Xian opened the door, and outside was an old man. The old man glanced at Yi Xian. "Young Master Yi is well." Yi Xian asked, "Your city lord?" The old man nodded slightly. After learning that young Master Yi had arrived, the city lord sent this old man to invite young Master Yi to the city lord's mansion. Yi Xian said with a smile, "What for?" The old man shook his head. "This old man doesn't know. Young Master Yi will know when you get there." Yi Xian asked, "What if I don't go?" The old man said, "This is up to young master." However, the city lord said that many people in the city are looking for young Master Yi, including a woman from the Tang clan. Tang clan's young miss. Yi Xian was silent. This woman still came in the end. After a moment, Yi Xian said, "Let's go." The old man nodded slightly. "Young Master Yi, please." Yi Xian walked out. Soon, under the old man's lead, he arrived at the city lord's mansion. In a large hall, the old man brought Yi Xian into the hall and quietly retreated. Not long after, a man walked in. The man's face was pale and he looked extremely weak. The man walked in front of Yi Xian and smiled. "Young Master Yi, I am the City Lord of Order City, Lu Shibai. Yi Xian nodded. City Lord Lu, why did you ask me to come here? Lu Shibai smiled, and then he looked to the side. There, a woman walked out. She wore a black dress, and she had an extremely beautiful appearance. This woman was the Tang clan's young miss. Tang clan's young miss looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Young Master Yi, I trust you've been well since we last met. Yi Xian smiled. I haven't seen you for a few days, and Miss Tang has become even more beautiful. I wonder if Miss Tang is betrothed to someone. Oh, I don't mean anything by it. I'm just asking really. Tang clan's young miss looked straight at Yi Xian, and she suddenly smiled. If young Master Yi is willing to give me that treasure as a betrothal gift, what harm is there in me marrying young Master Yi? Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he said, how about this? We'll have a son first, and after that, we'll give the treasure to our son. What do you think? Tang clan's young miss stared at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. Chapter 558. The atmosphere in the surroundings suddenly became slightly strange. At the side, Lu Shibai suddenly smiled and said, Brother Yi, it's not a simple matter for you to become the son-in-law of the Tang clan. Yi Xian smiled. It's fine. I'm willing to work hard. Lu Shibai shook his head. Let's get back to business. Yi Xian looked at Lu Shibai and smiled. Governor Lu, what role are you playing now? Lu Shibai smiled. Brother Yi, don't worry. I'm not greedy for the treasure. I was just dragged by Lady Tang to invite Brother Yi here for a talk. Yi Xian nodded. Let's talk then. I'm a very reasonable person. Lu Shibai smiled. Take your time. I'll keep a lookout for you. Then he stood up and left. After Lu Shibai left, Lady Tang looked at Yi Xian. What do I have to do for you to hand over the treasure? She didn't use force because she couldn't do it in the City of Order. This wasn't the Tang clan or Shenwu City. If she used force, the Order Alliance would definitely intervene. When the Tang clan and the Order Alliance fought, Yi Xian would reap the benefits again. Yi Xian smiled. Lady Tang, I want to ask you something. Does the Tang clan know what the treasure is? Lady Tang said, if we don't know what the Daoist is, why would we pay such a huge price to get it? Yi Xian smiled. I'm all ears. Lady Tang was silent for a moment. It's from the 5th dimension. Yi Xian asked, what else? Lady Tang looked at Yi Xian. Isn't that enough? Yi Xian was stunned. Then he shook his head. You guys really scared me. A 5th dimension item. Clearly, these people's understanding of the World Prison Pagoda was that it came from the 5th dimension. Other than that, they didn't know anything else. Lady Tang suddenly said, Young Master Yi obviously knows more than me. Why don't you tell me? How should I address Lady Tang? Yi Xian asked. It's really rude to keep calling you that. Lady Tang looked at Yi Xian. Tang Qing. Tang Qing. Yi Xian said seriously, it's a good name. The word Qing is extraordinary. There's a saying in ancient times, the blue sky, the white clouds, the moon on earth, shining alone on the mountains and rivers for 10,000 suns. This blue character? Tang Qing suddenly said, Young Master Yi, are you really a swordsman? Yi Xian looked at Tang Qing. Of course. Tang Qing shook his head. Why do I feel like you don't look like a swordsman at all? On the contrary, I think you're more like a lowly cultivator. Really lowly, I'm not joking. Yi Xian was speechless. Tang Qing picked up the teacup on the table and took a sip. Then she said, Young Master Yi, please introduce me to that treasure. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth curled up. Why don't you go in and take a look yourself, Miss Tang? Go in myself. Tang Qing narrowed her eyes. At this moment, the hall suddenly became very quiet. A moment later, Tang Qing shook her head and smiled. Young Master Yi, aren't you afraid that I'll go in and take it away? Yi Xian said seriously, I'm not afraid, because I believe in Miss Tang's character. Tang Qing looked straight at Yi Xian. I'm afraid, because I'm afraid that I won't be able to come out after I go in. Yi Xian smiled. Miss Tang doesn't believe in my character? Tang Qing nodded. I really don't. Yi Xian was speechless. Tang Qing said seriously, Young Master Yi, you're a smart person. I don't want to beat around the bush with you. My Tang clan will not give up on the treasure you have. Not only my Tang clan, but there are also many unknown forces who are eyeing it. Young Master Yi, leaving this treasure on you is a scourge to you. Do you know that? Yi Xian nodded. I know. Tang Qing stared at Yi Xian. Young Master Yi is not a stupid person. You've been keeping this treasure for so long. It's not because you're greedy, but for some other reason. Yi Xian smiled. An illusory Xiaota suddenly appeared between his eyebrows. Seeing this illusory Xiaota, Tang Qing's eyes narrowed. Yi Xian smiled. Miss Tang, this is the treasure you want. Tang Qing looked at the Xiaota. She slowly clenched her right hand, but then loosened it. What do you mean, young Master Yi? Yi Xian said seriously, Miss Tang, I can tell you that if this treasure falls into your hands, it will bring disaster to your Tang clan. Do you believe me? Tang Qing shook her head. You know nothing about my Tang clan's strength. Yi Xian smiled. You know nothing about this pagoda's abilities and dangers. Tang Qing looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian put away the prison pagoda and said, Miss Tang, do you know what happened in the never-ending starfield that day? Tang Qing said, I know Daoist a little. Yi Xian smiled. Then do you know why the Astral Lord did not dare to go to the never-ending starfield that day? Tang Qing looked at Yi Xian and did not speak. Yi Xian said, Miss Tang, anyone who wants this pagoda will not have a good ending. To be honest, I might not have a good ending in the future. But now, it's not that I don't want to give it to you. I can't give it to you. Tang Qing frowned. Why? Yi Xian smiled and did not speak. Tang Qing's expression changed. It has already recognized you as its master. Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Tang Qing said in a low voice, If I want this treasure, I must kill you first. Yi Xian said, Yes. Tang Qing looked at Yi Xian. Why are you telling me so much? Yi Xian smiled. I want to make you give up on the idea of taking the treasure. Tang Qing shook her head. Impossible. Even if I give up, my Tang clan will send someone else. Besides, young Master Yi, even if I believe you, my Tang clan will not allow this pagoda to fall into the hands of other factions, such as the Order Alliance or the demons. Yi Xian smiled. What do you plan to do next, Miss Tang? Tang Qing smiled. Prepare to watch the show. Yi Xian frowned. At this time, Tang Qing said, Young Master Yi, as you said, the treasure you have isn't simple. Of course, you aren't simple either. As such, I have issued a bounty for you in my name. Anyone who can kill you will be rewarded with 3 divine artifacts and 5 million divine crystals. Not only that, I have also revealed your whereabouts. Right now, there should be a lot of people gathered outside the City Lord's mansion. Yi Xian was silent. Tang Qing continued, Young Master Yi, don't think about making a move against me. If you kill me, the people sent by the Tang clan might not use such a gentle method. Moreover, young Master Yi, you can't kill me. If I were you, I would immediately escape because the Order Alliance's experts should be on their way. Not only them, but the demons' experts might also arrive soon. Yi Xian stood up and gave Tang Qing a thumbs up. Good plan, Miss Tang. Tang Qing looked straight at Yi Xian and smiled. Compared to young Master Yi, I'm still far inferior. You played with my Tang clan and the sword sect in the palm of your hand. Your intelligence isn't ordinary. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly vanished. Tang Qing smiled coldly, and her body suddenly turned illusory. Not only her, but the space around her also turned illusory. Obviously, she wanted to teleport away through this space. She didn't want to fight Yi Xian right now, because it was meaningless. Since Yi Xian and the treasure weren't simple, then she would let Yi Xian fight with others. The Tang clan would watch the show from behind and wait for an opportunity to act. Right at this moment, Tang Qing's expression suddenly changed. Because the space around her suddenly returned to normal. Tang Qing was just about to attack, but a sword was already pressed against her forehead. Tang Qing stared fixedly at Yi Xian. How did you do that? Yi Xian didn't waste his breath at all. He just grabbed Tang Qing's shoulder and tossed her into the pagoda. Within the pagoda, Tang Qing looked around vigilantly. She knew that this was probably the treasure, a space of its own. Meanwhile, a young girl appeared in front of Tang Qing, and it was Xiao Ling. Xiao Ling was stunned when she saw Tang Qing, and then she turned around and ran. She vanished in the blink of an eye. But it didn't take long for her to appear in front of Tang Qing again. But this time, there was a sword in her hand. Xiao Ling was vigilant as she gazed at Tang Qing. Tang Qing's eyes narrowed slightly. She was just about to attack when a mysterious force suddenly enveloped her. The first level of the Dao Law. As soon as this force appeared, Tang Qing noticed that she was actually unable to move at all. At this moment, Tang Qing's expression finally changed. Or it should be said that she was slightly panicked. Only now did she realize that she didn't seem to be able to resist. Tang Qing gradually calmed down. In front of her, looked at her warily, outside the pagoda. As soon as Tang Qing vanished, Lu Shibai suddenly walked in. He looked at Yi Xian and asked, "Where's Miss Tang?" Yi Xian smiled. "Miss Tang asked me not to tell her." Lu Shibai's eyes narrowed slightly. "Young Master Yi, it's best that you tell her." Yi Xian walked over to Lu Shibai and smiled. "City Governor Lu, this is a secret between me and Miss Lu." Lu Shibai looked Yi Xian in the eye. "What if I insist on young Master Yi telling me?" The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. "Who do you think you are?" As soon as he finished speaking, a flying sword suddenly slashed towards the right. In the blink of an eye, a bloody head fell from the space on the right. At this moment, Lu Shibai had already retreated outside the hall. In his eyes, there was a trace of fear. As Yi Xian walked out of the hall, Lu Shibai suddenly said, "Do you know what you're doing?" Yi Xian smiled. "It's none of your business." As soon as he finished speaking, he appeared outside the city governor's mansion. Beside Lu Shibai, an old man suddenly appeared. "Young master, do you want to keep him here?" Lu Shibai shook his head. "No. Even if we keep him here, it's meaningless. Killing him would only make things worse. Moreover, we can't kill him." The old man said in a deep voice, "Could it be that this person did something to that Miss Tang?" Lu Shibai shook his head. "Go inform the Tang clan experts outside the city. As for the rest, let them handle it themselves." The old man nodded slightly and turned to leave. Yi Xian did not leave in stealth because he had to cause trouble. The bigger the trouble he caused, the safer Yi Ling and the others in Divine Martial City would be. He had to attract the hatred. Yi Xian swaggered out of the city governor's mansion. At the entrance, he glanced around. There were many powerful auras in the dark. Yi Xian suddenly laughed. "I am Yi Xian. I'm right here. Come, please do me." Chapter 559. At the entrance of the city governor's mansion, Yi Xian's thunderous laughter reverberated through the sky. At this moment, almost the entire Order city heard his voice. In the city governor's mansion, Lu Shibai looked at Yi Xian with a solemn expression. This Yi Xian was either overconfident in himself or a lunatic. At this moment, an angry roar resounded from outside the city governor's mansion. "Little brat, don't be so arrogant. Grandpa will deal with you." As the voice resounded, a man suddenly appeared above Yi Xian's head. He was about to attack when a sword light suddenly shot up from the ground in an arc pist. In the air, the man's head flew off and blood splattered. The head fell to the ground and landed right beside Yi Xian's feet. Yi Xian kicked the head away and raised his head to look at the sky. He laughed loudly. "Too weak. Show me something stronger." The surroundings quietened down and no one attacked again. No one dared, because the expert that Yi Xian killed in an instant was a sage. And a Saint Realm powerhouse had been killed in seconds just like that. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly walked towards the outside of the city. Along the way, no one stopped him. However, there were some powerful auras around him. In next to no time, Yi Xian arrived at the city gate. At this moment, there were 39 people standing outside the city gate. The person in the lead was the Tang clan's Yuelao, and behind him were all the Tang clan's armored cavalry. If the Order Alliance did not interfere, this lineup was enough to trample the entire Order City. Yuelao stared at Yi Xian. "What did you do to eldest Miss?" Yi Xian smiled. "Miss Tang and I have already pledged to marry each other. Yuelao, from now on we are a family." Yuelao was furious. Bullsh *tu. At this moment, Tang Qing suddenly appeared beside Yi Xian. At this moment, Tang Qing's cultivation base had been sealed. This was not done by the prison pagoda, but by the 6th floor. In the prison pagoda could seal Tang Qing, but after coming out, the prison pagoda couldn't. However, as long as they entered the pagoda, the 6th floor could make a move. However, outside the pagoda, the 6th floor couldn't make a move. According to his words, he didn't want to attract the attention of the Tendo of the 4th dimension. No matter what, whoever entered the pagoda would be out of luck. Yi Xian walked to Tang Qing's side, his left hand wrapped around Tang Qing's waist. He said with a smile, "Yuelao, go back and tell my future father-in-law that Qing and I are truly in love. Tell him not to break us up. I don't want others to laugh at me." Yuelao flew into a rage. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Qing is already pregnant. Tell my future father-in-law that once the child is born, we will go back to see him. And that treasure will be my Yi Xian's betrothal gift." Elder Yuelao was trembling in anger. He still wanted to say something, but Yi Xian had already disappeared with Tang Qing. Just as Yuelao was about to chase, Tang Qing's voice suddenly rang out in his mind, "Don't chase." Yuelao stopped. The expression on his face was extremely unsightly. In the darkness, many experts were dumbfounded. This Yi Xian was Tang Clan's son-in-law? And that treasure was already given to Tang Clan as a betrothal gift? What was going on? Some people believed it, some didn't. No matter what, the situation had become even more complicated. Some experts who wanted to fight Yi Xian had already started to hesitate. Some even temporarily gave up on fighting Yi Xian. They were prepared to wait and see. Of course, there were some people who felt that something was wrong, but they didn't dare to act blindly without thinking. Inside the city lord's mansion, the old man beside Lu Shibai said in a deep voice, "This Tang Qing is being controlled." Lu Shibai nodded. "This Yi Xian isn't simple." The old man was about to speak, but at this moment, Lu Shibai suddenly looked towards the sky. "The Order Alliance's people are here. Unfortunately, they are a bit late." Just as he finished speaking, several experts suddenly appeared in the sky above the city lord's mansion. Outside Order City, in a mountain range thousands of miles away, Yi Xian found a waterfall. He sat beside the pool. Not far from him was Tang Qing. Tang Qing looked at Yi Xian. "You want to shift the attention of the world to my Tang clan." Yi Xian nodded. Tang Qing said indifferently, "Some brainless people believe you, but do you think those with brains will believe you?" Yi Xian smiled. "It's enough that your people don't find trouble with me for the time being. Or rather, it's enough that they find trouble with me. And everyone else." Tang Qing squinted his eyes. "You are attracting hatred, hoping that everyone's attention will be focused on you. This way, no one will care about your sister in Divine Martial City." Yi Xian smiled, not saying anything. Tang Qing glanced at Yi Xian. She walked to Yi Xian's side, sat down, and placed her feet in the river, gently floating with the water. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. He didn't care about Tang Qing. The current her couldn't escape. The restriction on the 6th floor, unless it was an expert above Dao realm, couldn't be broken. Even those above Dao realm might not be able to break it. Tang Qing suddenly asked, "Who placed the restriction on me?" Yi Xian smiled, "A senior." Tang Qing squinted his eyes. "The rumored person behind you?" Yi Xian shook his head. "No, a senior who was originally in this pagoda." Tang Qing frowned. "Your pagoda, there are people imprisoned?" Yi Xian nodded. "Yes." Tang Qing said in a deep voice, "How strong are they?" Yi Xian smiled. "If they come out, it shouldn't be a problem to destroy your Tang clan." Tang Qing shook her head. "You don't know anything about my Tang clan." Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then asked in his heart, "Senior, with your strength, can you destroy this Tang clan?" Let me clarify, this Tang clan should be extremely strong. The sixth person was silent for a moment, and then he said, "Am I very weak in your heart?" Yi Xian was stunned, and then he shook his head. "Of course not." The sixth person said, "Then why are you asking me this question? You just need to understand one thing. I'm imprisoned on the 6th floor, and the experts of the Tang clan are still roaming around outside." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Senior, there are still geniuses out there." The sixth person said, "Of course, but the true experts won't appear in this universe." Yi Xian was puzzled. "Why?" The sixth person said, "Because if you go out of this universe, you will be rejected by the Tendo." "Do you know what a Tendo is?" "Tendo?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I don't really know." The sixth person said, "The spirit of this universe." Yi Xian asked, "Is it strong?" The sixth person said, "Not strong. You can go defy the heavens in the future." Yi Xian's face darkened. "Like hell, I'll believe you." At this moment, Tang Qing suddenly said, "That senior is definitely strong, but do you really think he can go against my Tang clan? If he can, why is he holed up in the pagoda?" Yi Xian looked at Tang Qing. "Miss Tang, don't test me. Because even if I told you his true strength, you wouldn't believe me." Tang Qing looked at Yi Xian. "Tell me, I'll believe you." Yi Xian smiled. "That senior is imprisoned in a treasure of the 5th dimension. Miss Tang Qing, do you think he's simple?" Tang Qing fell silent. Yi Xian shook his head and didn't say anything else. He sat cross-legged on the ground and then led Tang Qing into the pagoda. Cultivation. Whenever he had time, he would cultivate like a madman, and during this time, his close combat skills had greatly improved. Yi Xian was cultivating, the Emperor Hound was still sleeping, and Xiaoling was still working on her spirit fruits. Tang Qing looked at the entire pagoda and fell into deep thought. In the beginning, before coming into contact with the pagoda, she also felt that it was only a treasure and couldn't possibly harm the Tang clan. But now, she gradually changed her mind. The feeling this pagoda gave her was terror. Extremely terrifying. Intuition told her that the Tang clan couldn't control this pagoda. And for the Tang clan to give up, that was impossible. Tang Qing pondered for a long time, and then she came to the 2nd floor, where Xiaoling was working on her spirit fruits. Seeing Tang Qing, her expression instantly became alert. Towards humans, apart from Yi Xian, she was wary of everyone else. Tang Qing smiled. "You're planting spirit fruits?" Xiaoling nodded. "Yes." Tang Qing smiled. "Why are you following a human?" Clearly, she had already recognized Xiaoling's identity. Xiaoling blinked and then said, "He's a good person, he won't hurt me." Tang Qing asked, "How do you know he's not using you?" Xiaoling looked at Tang Qing. "Are you trying to sow discord between me? Let me tell you, I won't fall for your trick, unless you chase the 6th floor away from me." Tang Qing narrowed her eyes. "Is he very powerful?" Xiaoling nodded and said seriously, "Very powerful." Tang Qing asked, "Has he always been here?" Xiaoling looked at Tang Qing. "Human, are you trying to trick me?" Tang Qing, Xiaoling looked at Tang Qing. "If you do me a favor, I'll be tricked by you." Tang Qing, Xiaoling pointed to the 6th floor. "The 6th floor? You help me chase away the guy on the 6th floor, and I'll let you trick me. How about it?" Tang Qing shook his head and smiled. "I don't have that ability." Xiaoling spread her hands. "Then I won't be tricked by you." After saying that, she turned around and continued to play with her spirit fruits. Tang Qing was silent for a moment, then turned and left. Soon, she arrived in front of the Emperor Hound, looked at it, and frowned slightly. After a moment, her expression suddenly changed. "You're the legendary guardian beast of the Protoss?" The Emperor Hound opened its eyes and looked at Tang Qing. "You know me?" Seeing the Emperor Hound admit it, Tang Qing's expression became extremely solemn. "It's really you. You're also locked here?" The Emperor Hound asked, "How do you know me?" Tang Qing said solemnly, "My Tang clan has some records about the Protoss." The Emperor Hound's expression was indifferent, and after a moment, it shook its head slightly and went back to sleep. The glory of the Protoss, after all, had become history. At this time, Tang Qing asked again, "Why are you here?" The Emperor Hound ignored Tang Qing, and Tang Qing didn't continue asking, returning to the first floor of the prison pagoda. Looking at Yi Xian, who was training with the wooden man, Tang Qing fell into deep thought. At this time, Yi Xian's expression suddenly changed, and the next moment, he directly left the prison pagoda. As soon as he left, the space in front of him split open, and a spear pierced through the air, stabbing straight at him. Chapter 560. When the spear came, Yi Xian didn't dodge. He took a quick step forward and stabbed with his sword. That sword was as fast as lightning. That sword was as sharp as an awl. Bang! The spear and sword shook violently and the two figures retreated rapidly. Soon Yi Xian stopped. Not far from him stood a middle-aged man. The middle-aged man wore a tight-fitting robe. He stood ramrod straight and held a spear in his right hand. His eyes were as sharp as knives. The middle-aged man looked coldly at Yi Xian. "Where's the young lady?" "An expert of the Tang clan." Yi Xian smiled. "She's fine. Don't worry." The middle-aged man looked coldly at Yi Xian. "Yi Xian, I heard that you're a young talent. I didn't expect you to use a woman as a hostage. That's not what a man would do." Yi Xian said indifferently, "I heard that the Tang clan is a great clan. I didn't expect you to send dozens of Dao realm experts to deal with a young man who's not even 20 years old. Is this what a man would do?" The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes. "It seems that you won't hand over the young lady." Yi Xian smiled. "I won't hand her over. I'll piss you off." The middle-aged man's eyes twitched. His eyes became colder. "Then go to hell." As he said that, he was about to attack. However, Yi Xian turned around and ran. He was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared into the dense forest. The middle-aged man's face changed. He stomped his right foot and dashed into the forest. However, when he entered the forest, Yi Xian had disappeared. The middle-aged man gripped his spear tightly in his right hand. He was extremely vigilant. Before he came, he already knew about Yi Xian. This person had the strength to kill Dao realm experts. No, he had the ability to kill Dao realm experts in seconds. He couldn't afford to be careless against Yi Xian, especially when it came to Yi Xian, who hid in the dark and assassinated him. The middle-aged man didn't continue to move forward. He started to retreat until he reached the edge of the forest. Then he used his divine sense to scan the forest in front of him. However, he didn't find anything, and his expression became even more solemn. In the end, the middle-aged man hesitated for a moment before choosing to leave. Somewhere in the dense forest, Yi Xian frowned slightly. This guy actually didn't want to come in? If the other party came in, he was 90% sure that he could kill him. Of course, he was confident in facing them head-on. However, he couldn't face them head-on because he didn't know how many of them were rushing over. The Tang clan would not challenge him to a duel. Other than the Tang clan, he also needed to be careful of the Order Alliance. Seeing that the middle-aged man refused to enter, Yi Xian turned around and left. After the middle-aged man left, he returned to Order City. In a certain tea house in the city, a middle-aged man sat down. In front of him was an old man, Elder Yuelao. Yuelao looked at the middle-aged man. "Failed?" The middle-aged man nodded. Yuelao said solemnly, "Lin Mook, this person can't be underestimated." The middle-aged man called Lin Mook nodded. "I exchanged one move with him. This person's strength has surpassed the Dao realm. Rumor has it that he has many trump cards. If he uses them all, normal Dao realm experts won't be his match." Saying this, he looked at Yuelao. "Is the miss still alive?" Yuelao shook his head. "I don't know. What is the family's attitude?" Lin Mook said solemnly, "You know that the miss has an engagement with the Qin clan. Once this matter spreads out, the Qin clan and our Tang clan will lose face." Saying this, he hesitated. Yuelao said softly, "Is there anything you can't tell me?" Lin Mook sighed. "The Qin clan is worried about their face." "I'm afraid they will." Yuelao's eyes narrowed. "They dare." Lin Mook shook his head. Our Tang clan needs people now. The Qin clan can be considered our right hand. We have to care about their face. Yuelao said solemnly, "What is the family's attitude?" Lin Mook said, "Let me find her." Saying this, he didn't continue. Yuelao's face sank. At this moment, Lin Mook said, "The Qin clan might have already sent people out, and their goal," Yuelao said coldly, "they wouldn't dare." Lin Mook shook his head, "We have to find the miss first. Otherwise, the family might have already acquiesced to the Qin clan." Yuelao suddenly raged, "That damned Yi Xian, he is a hooligan." That night, in the vast mountain range, Yi Xian leaned against a tree and sat down. In front of him was a bonfire. He had already used chaotic energy to cover the surrounding space. Opposite Yi Xian was Tang Qing. Yi Xian was roasting a wild chicken. It was golden and fragrant. Tang Qing suddenly asked, "Why don't you ask me how he found you?" Yi Xian said, "Apart from you, there is no one else." Tang Qing looked at Yi Xian, "Then you're just going to let it go like this?" Yi Xian smiled, "I don't care what method you use to inform your Tang clan's experts. I'll give you another chance. You have a second chance, but not a third." Tang Qing lightly said, "Bringing me along will only make your situation more troublesome." Yi Xian shook his head, "With or without you, my situation will become very troublesome." Tang Qing looked at Yi Xian, "Young Master Yi, your wisdom is outstanding. If you are willing to give up that treasure, Yi Xian smiled and said, "Miss Tang Qing, firstly, although this treasure doesn't belong to me, it is indeed mine for now. Don't you think it's a little too far-fetched for you to claim that it's for my own good by snatching something that belongs to me? Second, I've told you before, it's not that I don't want to give it up, but that it is one with me. If I want to give it up, it won't be willing." Tang Qing looked at Yi Xian, "Then what do you plan to do? Become enemies with the entire world?" Yi Xian shook his head, "This isn't what I want. But if the entire world wants to become my enemy, then I have no choice. If I have to kill, then I have to kill. If I have to run, then I have to flee." Tang Qing's eyelids twitched. "Are you crazy? Can you kill my Tang clan? Can you kill the Order Alliance? Can you kill the Demon clan?" Yi Xian spread his hands. "Then what do you think I should do? Surrender? I beg you to let me off this time." Actually, it wasn't that he didn't want to give up the world prison pagoda. Rather, this pagoda had already followed him and was connected to his divine soul. If this pagoda didn't voluntarily remove its connection with him, then if anything happened to it, he would be the first to die. Moreover, this was Yi Xian's item. Why would he hand it over? Moreover, if he handed it over, would they let him off? These people wouldn't let him off. The more he knelt, the faster he would die. Now that he had the pagoda, he had a trump card. At least if he couldn't win, he could perish together with them. Once he handed it over, he could only wait for death if he couldn't win. He wouldn't hand it over even if he died. Take a risk, take a gamble, everything is possible. Tang Qing looked at Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian flicked his finger and a chicken drumstick landed in front of Tang Qing. The latter didn't stand on ceremony and ate it. After Yi Xian finished eating, he leaned against the tree and asked in his heart, "Senior, how can I unlock the 7th level?" He couldn't wait to obtain the unparalleled martial art in the 7th level. Immeasurable sword. If he could obtain this unparalleled martial art, his ability to protect himself would be greatly enhanced. The 6th person said, "Dao Law. If you can find the 7th level Dao Law, you can enter." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "If I find the 9th level Dao Law, will I be able to enter?" The 6th person said, "In theory, yes." Yi Xian was struck dumb. Then he asked, "Why in theory?" The 6th person said, "Why do you want to open the 9th level? Are you courting death?" Yi Xian, the 6th person said, "Did you forget about the 5th person? Or is it because I'm too easy to talk to that you think that everyone in the pagoda is easy to talk to?" Yi Xian broke out in a cold sweat. Indeed. He almost forgot about that. Although the 6th person was easy to talk to, Jian Zizai and the 5th person weren't easy to talk to at the beginning. Especially the 5th person, he almost killed him. The 7th person said, "Walk the path you're walking on." The sixth floor continued, "Walk the path you're walking on." As he said that, he seemed to have thought of something and looked at Tang Qing. "Miss Tang, are there any differences in the Dao realm?" He realized that he had met some Dao realm experts, but among them, there were weak and strong ones. He realized that he had met some Dao realm experts. But among these Dao realm experts, there were some who were weak and some who were really strong. Tang Qing glanced at Yi Xian. "You don't know." Tang Qing said, "Dao realm is divided into 3 types: beginning Dao, knowing Dao, and proving Dao. Beginning Dao is to know the existence of Dao, and knowing Dao is to have a certain understanding of Dao. Proving Dao is to have a good understanding. The Genesis Dao is to know the existence of the Dao, and this first knowledge is to have a certain understanding of the Dao, and this Dao validation is to have more or less understood. Beginning Dao is to know the existence of Dao, and knowing Dao is to have a certain understanding of it. Proving Dao is to have a good understanding of it." Tang Qing said, "Those who came this time are all at the Genesis Dao realm. However, their strength isn't something that the Genesis Dao realm experts outside can compare to." Tang Qing said, "Our Tang clan cavalry is divided into 3 types: proving Dao realm cavalry, beginning Dao realm cavalry, and above that." She looked at Yi Xian. 3 different levels of Tang clan cavalry. This woman was telling him how strong the Tang clan was. Yi Xian asked, "What level are Mu Fengchen and Wu Wen from the sword sect?" Tang Qing said, "Knowing Dao realm." Yi Xian asked, "What about Yu Wuchen?" Tang Qing said, "He's still knowing Dao realm." Yi Xian frowned, "But his strength far surpasses Wu Wen and Mu Fengchen." Tang Qing said, "Because he has another identity, the Extraordinary Sword Saint. The Extraordinary Sword Saint is equivalent to the Dao validation realm. If he attains the Dao validation realm and is an Extraordinary Sword Saint, then he can even easily surmount realms to kill experts above the Dao validation realm." "An Extraordinary Sword Saint," Yi Xian said solemnly. "Miss Tang, what level do you think he is in the Sword Dao?" He was a great sword immortal before this, but he didn't know what level he was at now. Tang Qing glanced at Yi Xian. "Cheap Sword Saint? Extraordinary Cheap Sword Saint?" Yi Xian was taken aback, and then he said, "Am I considered a transcendent sword saint?" Tang Qing nodded, "Yes. Even Yu Wuchen isn't a match for you at the same level." Yi Xian was speechless. P.S. Also, I want tickets. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.